Okay, we'll call the committee of the whole meeting to order. It's Tuesday, May 23rd at 7:30 PM. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Rosado?
Here.
Atack? Here. Stark?
Here.
Chanseth?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
Salvati?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
O'Brien?
Here.
Callahan?
Here.
Meitzler?
Here.
Mueller?
Here.
Ewer?
Here.
Saron?
Here.
And McFadden?
Here. Yeah, we have a full quorum. Next item is item 2, which is items removed, added, or changed. I don't have anything, Laura? No? Okay. Item 3, matters from the public for items that are not on the agenda. So if anybody has anything for us that is not on the agenda? No? Okay. Item 4 is the consent agenda. We've got 4 items on there. Item A is Resolution 17-64-R, authorization to purchase a self-contained leaf collection trailer from RNOW in the amount of $66,551.95. We all got a memo with the full explanation and justification from Scott Haynes. We also have item B, which is ordinance 17-33, annexing of 34 West 973 Sunset Drive, memo from Scott Buning. Item C, ordinance 17-34, annexing 34 West 893 Chillum Drive, again, memo from Scott Buning. Item D, ordinance 17-35, annexing 1119 Morton Street, and that also came from Scott Buning. Any questions or comments on those 4 items? Nope. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Stark, second by Chanzik, to recommend to City Council the 4 items under the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Item 5, which is a presentation for the NPDES permit with the education for the public. And Andrea is going to present that, but Alderman O'Brien, did you have any comments on that?
No, it's this permit we're going to need to get, and I'll let Andrea take it from there.
Okay.
As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about our NPDES MS4 permit, and my name is Andrea Pedraza. I'm the senior civil engineer. I don't know if there's many people here in the public, but it's, I'll kind of go through here, and it's something that we apply for every year, or we renew every year, and coming June 1st, I'll be submitting our annual permit. So why are we here? Last year, the Illinois EPA updated their MS4 permit, and it was reissued on February 10th. And out of our 6 minimum control measures, the second one was updated that stated that we needed to provide a minimum of 1 public meeting annually for the public to provide input as to the adequacy of the permittee's MS4 program. So you ask, what is an MS4 program? Before I get into that, some of you may not even know what the acronym NPDES MS4 stands for. NPDES stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. MS4 is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems. So as you can see in this diagram, there are different pipes that come from various locations such as houses and roadways, and they all discharge into that body of water. That is what the separate storm sewer system is, where it collects all the water and runoff and drains elsewhere. So there's a little bit of history on the NPDES. It was established after the Clean Water Act was created in 1972, and the program actually was created in 1987. And ultimately, we had to get the MS4 permit, but it started out with the large MS4s for municipalities that were located in urban areas defined by the Census Bureau of populations above 250,000 people. And as they started acclimating those communities, they whittled it down to smaller communities, the medium populations between 100 and 249,000, and then the small MS4s are populations below 100,000. So all the municipalities in the Chicago region are required to fill out the MS4, and this also includes public entities such as Fermilab, they have their own MS4, so it's not just municipalities. There's college campuses that have to have an MS4 as well. Tonight, I wanted to quickly discuss the duration of the permit, what the permit covers, the 6 minimum control measures that we have to follow and abide by, the monitoring, record keeping, and reporting that we do, and then open it up for any questions. So the first one is the permit duration. As I mentioned, the MS4 has been around since 1987, but as they started implementing it to smaller communities, we did not have to get our first MS4 permit till 2003. And that permit has been on a 5-year cycle, and that's what they initially planned. This last cycle took a little bit longer as they were updating some of the requirements that were coming down from federal government. The permit requires a notice of intent that gets filed with the EPA, and it allows us to discharge our stormwater to the public waters. The NOI follows all those minimum 6 measures, and we have to let them know what we're going to try and accomplish, and then every reporting season, we have to then tell them if we met our goal or why we did not. Our municipality obtains the ILR 40 permit, and any developer that comes to our community would obtain an ILR 10, which still has some of the same requirements. So our current permit will expire in 2021, and until that time, we'll be filling out the same information and updating it. The next topic is, what do we cover in this permit? What areas does it entail? As I mentioned, the MS4 is a storm sewer system, so it's a conveyance or system of conveyances that ultimately get the water that comes off of your roof, snow melt, water that comes from your sump pumps, groundwater, and it makes its way to the storm sewer system. On the left of this picture, you can see all the storm sewer pipes that are coming from houses and then discharging to the river on the left. On the right side, there's a combined sewer system, so I've felt that this picture adequately described the city of Batavia, where we still do have parts of town that do collect stormwater runoff and drop it off at the wastewater treatment plant before it ultimately discharges into the river. So for the MS4 permit, it only covers the uncombined sewer. It is not part of the sewage treatment plant, and it's owned by the city, village, or other entities, as I mentioned, like Fermi has their own. And it's designed to collect and convey all that water, the storm drains. And many people don't realize the system because it's all buried. And then there's other aspects of it, such as ditches and creeks, which are also things that we need to maintain because it helps convey that water and gets it away from the houses. And lastly is the street that conveys the water. Water is meant to be in the street. It floods it occasionally, but eventually the water dissipates and goes into the system and moves on down. So there are certain things that are allowed to be discharged and other things that are prohibited. Such items as water line flushing of the fire hydrants is prohibited. It's the clean water, groundwater that would come from your sump pumps, any air conditioning condensation, irrigation water that you would use to water your lawn, storm sewer cleaning water, individual residential car washing, and that also they do recommend to try and publicly it says you should wash your cars on your lawn to help get some of that soap suds out. Most people don't, and the soap suds do kind of run into the storm drain, but it's kind of diluted and not as highly concentrated, so it's acceptable to a certain degree. Dechlorinated pH neutral swimming pool waters, so as long as it runs over and has the chemicals to lessen it so the pH is not that high. Prohibited discharges would be concrete and wastewater from the concrete, drywall compound, any wastewater from painting, fuels, oils, straight soap, solvents, and detergents, and toxic and hazardous substances. We work with the fire department to locate these and have illicit discharge, and I'll discuss that a little bit later, but you can see that water right there has that nice sheen of oil in there. This is one of the most famous scenes. I'm going to try this, see if it works. I live in the city of Wheaton, and they brought this up, and they used this, so I'm kind of stealing it. Sorry, it's not loud. So, sorry, that was not very loud, but I thought it was worth sharing. It pretty much said, Clark says he should know better to do that. Dumping that into the storm sewer is illegal. So just watch out for those eddies in town. Permit, what else it covers is we have multiple subbasins within our municipality. A majority of the water runs to the Fox River. Some of it goes there directly. So out of the 5 subbasins, we have the Fox River subbasin, which extends through multiple municipalities throughout Kane County. We have Mahoney Creek, which was one of our larger ones that has the tributary as well as the main stem of the creek. We have Mill Creek, Batavia Creek, and then Indian Creek, which runs more towards Aurora and through Fermi, and then discharges further south into the Fox River. Our minimum control measures, as I mentioned, there's 6 of them. So the number 1 is public education and outreach. Number 2 is public involvement and participation. 3 is illicit discharge detection and elimination. 4 is construction site storm water runoff and control. And 5 is a post-construction stormwater management. And the last one is pollution prevention and good housekeeping for the municipal operations that we do on a daily basis. So starting off with number 1 is the public education and outreach. This is the community's responsibility to reach out to the citizens and inform them of things to better the environment and the water. And we occasionally publish articles in the Neighbors magazine. We have the annual rain barrel sale that happens every spring, as well as the Conservation Foundation's Conservation at Home presentation that happens in April. In addition, every year the BATV airs the After the Storm video by the EPA and the Weather Channel, and it talks about ways to convey rainwater, and that runs usually, Jen will run it for me in both the spring a handful of times, and then in the fall, October or November, about 10 to 12 times each time it's run. In addition, somebody from the engineering staff does attend the career day at the high school and explains to the high school students what we do and how we play a part in protecting our environment. We also send letters to homeowners that live adjacent to those creeks that I just mentioned, and we cycle that through. So this year, I believe it's Mill Creek that will be getting a letter. So everybody that backs up to that creek will receive a letter and handouts from Kane County, which part of the permit does allow to use other municipalities or governmental agencies to team together. So being in the Kane County, we are able to take advantage of some of their material, and we put in 10, I think there's 10 tips on living next to a stream, and they're out in City Hall as well, upstairs, I believe, and some are even, I haven't checked, but I think they used to be in the when engineering was down here in community development. So they're available also for the public. And then we do truck tails during the week of Public Works Week, which happens to be this week. So Gary was out there yesterday. So that presents a story talking about engineering and what we do over at Public Works. And then they also get to go and touch the truck and get up in the snowplow. Next is the public involvement and participation. One of the items that we participate in, and we would be Byron, he is very active in the Fox River Study Group. They meet the 4th Thursday of each month at the Fox Water Reclamation District, and anybody can attend those, but he's there on behalf of the city. And then we do the annual river cleanup, which is typically the 3rd Saturday in May. Unfortunately, this year we decided to cancel it for that day, and we're looking at rescheduling it right now. I'm not sure if we're going to do a July or an October date. I'm working with Friends of the Fox to get that date up there, but it's to help remove all that pollution and clear our waterways. The next measure is the illicit discharge detection and elimination. As this graphic shows, we only want only rain going down the storm drain. Keep out that oily residue. We brought forward an illicit discharge detection and elimination section in the code that now will allow us to enforce that. If we ever do find that, it's a collaborative effort between Public Works, Code Enforcement, the Fire Department. So we'll be modifying that and amending some of what we do to have a solid procedure in place, but all of our departments do work together to make sure that that is eliminated, and we contact the businesses, because a lot of the time it happens to come from our business partners in town, so we just want to keep that at bay, and we do go out and monitor when we have the availability. So we have outfall maps that show us where all of our flared end sections would be, which are the end runs of your storm sewer and where your creeks discharge. And we can go out there and inspect those, and we're trying to get on a 4 to 5 year cycle where we can go through all of them. And with the help of interns, this summer we're gonna start going through them again. So we just wanna make sure that some of those items, such as pesticides and even or pet waste and all of that, stays out of the storm sewer, because that ultimately affects the waterways, and many communities actually pull water from the river. Next, we have the construction site stormwater runoff control, which monitors how much water can be released from a site at a certain time. We follow the King County Stormwater Ordinance, which sets the rate for which the release can be from the site. We also have erosion and sediment control best management practices that follow the King County Stormwater Ordinance Technical Manual. And if we go around, we can issue the stop work orders, which is on the left, and they have 2 days to fix it. Those would be issued for silt fence not being in place, maybe filter baskets being full, just poor management of the erosion control. And in addition, we partner with the Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District for Batavia, and they review all of our acre or more projects that come in to make sure that we're meeting current standard guidelines for erosion control and updating that. And they also go do some routine inspections on our sites as well while they're under construction. Some of those items that we're looking for, the first picture right underneath the number 4 is a construction entrance. That helps. It's always stoned. Minimum is usually 100 feet long, goes anywhere from 14 to 28 feet wide. It's stoned just to help remove the dirt off of the tires, because typically those pieces of equipment are going into a construction site that's bare earth, and we do not want that to enter our roadways and get carried into our storm drains. And to protect our storm drains, we use that catch-all inlet protection bag. So those are placed in all of the structures that are anywhere within the vicinity of a construction site. You can, if you go out to any site now, even Tanglewood, I believe they're not final approved for mass earth. There's still sites going on, homes going up. You should find those out there. Every site before any earth is ever moved needs to have a silt fence installed. The picture on the right shows it being upright, protecting the dirt from moving off-site. The one on the left has been compromised. You can see that it will only take a little bit more for it to cave in, and then that if we get rain, it could potentially go over. So those are the things where we would issue a stop work order and have them repair that. Post-construction stormwater management. As I mentioned, we follow the King County Stormwater Ordinance. So as they're starting to finish up their sites, the picture on the left is showing all the utilities going in, making sure that all of that's done properly. We want to make sure that the earth has been graded and seeded, and then that it's all protected. Also, we want to make sure that the restrictor is put in. So there are some final measures, and we will not release a permit until they have 90% density of their grass and a stable surface so we don't have all that issue and runoff. Lastly, it falls back to the municipality in the pollution prevention, good housekeeping for us. Things that we must do to keep our practices safe and not hurting or creating more cause of pollution to the environment. So one of the things that we do is we go and do inspections. This is done by the Streets Division. That's our Vector truck. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that, but they will go out there and hose and jet and clean out sewers that, as I mentioned, there's stuff that comes off the road. You have the dirt from construction that sometimes seeps through, just gravel, rocks, and all that nature sediment ends up building up sand in the sewers. So every once in a while, we will go out there and jet the sewers to clear them to make sure that they're at capacity. And then it also allows them to be TV'd. So Scott Haynes is in charge of this and his crew, and they monitor the sewers and where they need to go. We also, which is required in this latest permit, have a salt dome. So we've met that requirement. We had 2 years since the last permit, but it helps prevent any of the chemicals from directly entering the storm sewer system. It keeps them shielded from the environments. And some communities used to use a tarp, and you'll see that for contractors doing that. That is no longer permissible under this new permit. So like I said, we have already met that. All of our public works trucks are washed inside and drained. In the top picture, it shows the floor drain running down the center of the aisle, and then the bottom picture shows the one manhole, and off the back of the truck is a triple basin, which is more like a grease trap. It's a sanitary system, so that water does not go into the storm sewer. It gets treated. We also do annual street sweeping. Again, these are more things that are in line with our public works crew with Scott doing this. They do the street sweeping at least 2 to 4 times per year downtown in the central business district. He does it a lot more frequently, and they have different staff attend training seminars for good housekeeping, salt applications and chemical and brine mixtures and all of that as well. Lastly, we have the monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. We have to do monitoring as part of the requirement, and we are part of that Fox River Study Group, so they will be monitoring different sections of pollutants coming in at the upstream end of Batavia and also at the downstream end. But as I showed, we have different creeks that run through town, so they also pick up pollutants from other areas and other communities. But that's something that's a little bit of a newer standard, so we're working on that and fine-tuning that. But we're able to and lucky to be able to utilize the Fox River Study Group information. As I mentioned, our annual report is due June 1st every year, so that will be going out next week. And once those are submitted, they're to be publicly published. So those are on the city website, which is under the engineering section, under water resources. And then phase 2, they have the actual NOIs, which are the every 5-year cycle, as well as individual years. And that wraps it up. I don't know if there's any questions or comments, or if you guys are all good.
I guess
Are you still awake?
Could you talk a little bit about the monitoring? I mean, how's it go? Are there certain standards? What are the standards when we monitor, and how
Yes.
are discharges going, and how many sites are there that they monitor?
You know, as I said, that's something that's a little bit newer, so I'm still not extremely familiar with that, so I do have my cheat sheet up here. I know for different size communities, we can start off with just doing site things, looking at color of the water coming out, looking at erosion control. It's starting off slowly, and then eventually it's doing lab samples of,
So we're not required to do that at this point?
some of it is taken care of with the Fox River Study Group.
Okay,
And again, we're getting there.
okay.
It's,
So can you tell me again what the Fox River Study Group is?
Lucy, use the mic, will
Can
you?
you tell me again what the Fox River Study Group is? Who's part of that, and what do they do?
the Fox River Study Group is a compilation of the communities along the Fox River. As this new permit was coming out, they knew that we were not hitting certain criteria. Where we sit in the United States has a lot less restrictions than the East Coast. The East Coast has been they're above and beyond and about a bit further ahead in stormwater management and just even BMPs and chemicals and looking at, they call them TMDLs. They monitor that a lot more. It's starting to move this way, so they knew that some of our water is impaired, and you go on websites and find out that there's sections of the Fox River that have impaired waterways, meaning fecal coliform in it, and so it's supposed to get back to that recreational use. So this group formed, and I don't recall when, I don't know if, Gary, do you remember when?
15+ years ago.
So they've been working on this plan. It's called the FRIP, the Fox River Implementation Plan. And because we're within that community, it helps cover some of these requirements by the permit. So it's setting standards that are slightly different from what the EPA has. And as long as we follow those and we're in that group, we comply.
Okay. And there was a picture of a dumpster, and what was that for?
I'm
Was
not,
that from the
I
cleanup?
think that was
or-
cleaning the river.
that was
Oh, the
The
cleanup.
cleanup river?
Yes.
All right. We don't have a dumpster available for the public, though, do we? Just throw things periodically,
For, like, by the river?
or anywhere, yeah? No?
You don't have a public available dumpster. It would be something to be filled all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, but
No, not
there's
in a good
not,
way.
I know, but there's like, are there dumps anymore? Where do people
Yeah.
take, where's the dump?
The dump is right at Fabian.
And you can
Right
drop
on.
stuff off there?
Yeah.
People have been asking me, okay,
Yes.
so you can just drive over there and,
Yeah, you pay and they take your stuff.
Electronics. There's electronics recycling.
Yes, but there's also like,
a garbage dump. Is there a garbage dump?
oh, not in the last
Not
couple of years,
anymore.
not after they closed it. That's
So-
right.
But you can take your stuff, is it during the week, Gary, or is it just on Saturday that homeowners can go to the waste transfer
Yeah,
station?
that's it.
That's what Thank you was just talking
Yeah.
about.
You can go there just about any weekday, and it'll go by weight, they'll weigh your vehicle and before and after, and you pay by weight.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Knew that.
Do we, the SWIP, there's a SWIP program, right? Do we make home builders write up a SWIP plan?
Yes, every set of engineering plans that is approved has stormwater management plan, and then they sign that, and that, like I said, we have the the ILR 40, and we get that permit from the IEPA, every home builder that goes for the larger sites, not the individual lots, like Toll Brothers with Tanglewood, their whole site has an ILR 10 for that, so they have to comply. But anything under an acre does not, so an individual home site would fall under the broad spectrum, but if these infill lots would not have the ILR 10, but we would still make them follow the guidelines of the King County Stormwater Ordinance.
And you mentioned in the presentation, riverbank stabilization. Do we have to maintain the riverbank to have a positive outlook with this?
Well, we are supposed to maintain our waterways. That would be a discussion for
Okay.
the owners to decide as to how far and how we can fund some of those things. There are a lot of creeks that run through backyards, and those are privately owned. So I know that falls on the homeowners, the responsibility of maintaining those. It's just the way they were done, not saying that
Right.
that's the way that it would be done today, but that's how it was created back then.
But even with those creeks, I didn't mean to get onto that, but with creeks behind people's homes, there's easements.
There are, that allows us to go in there. It doesn't mean that we own the property, and again, it comes to funding. So
and
it's
then
a
it-
bigger
then it
discussion we
also-
can have later.
It's also the Army Corps of Engineers. You just can't go into these creeks and do things.
Correct, they're all under the waters of the US. So when I did the Mahoney Creek at Cleveland and Redant, we did have to get a permit through them for
Right.
restoration, and then there are requirements for management and maintenance, but just, as long as you can continually upkeep it, going in there and making sure that you're protecting the slopes by putting native plants or riprap and just making sure that it's not washing away so that you're not compromising the system.
And we did recognize homeowners, even just a couple months ago.
Right,
Came
we
in
did.
and redid their.
Quite
creek.
costly for those folks.
It was costly for them. They invested in their property and they got an Army Corps permit and they stabilize their property.
I mean, like $50,000 costly. So, I mean, that's investment in your property. I don't think you'd realize that investment if you sell the property for that. Maybe if you put it into the building structure itself, you might, you know. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with that, but, I mean, it gets to be costly to do.
It does, but one thing is, once you lose property, you can't put it back when it's under the control of the Army Corps. Once it gets eroded away, you cannot fill, because most
Correct.
of that's in the floodplain, so you cannot fill. Once it's gone, it's gone. So that's why it's important to maintain it while it's there.
One last final question, I don't mean to. We have this permit. Do we have a second permit for the wastewater treatment facility also?
We do.
Okay. And then what, that's every 5 years also?
It's on a 5-year cycle also, and that one also was delayed, so that one's now back on a 5-year cycle again.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick question. It seems like we're doing everything we need to do. If there was something that we didn't do and we didn't qualify for a permit, I mean, is there a penalty? Do we know what that penalty is?
There are communities that I guess have not followed the procedures, and there's fines for that, but we just got audited last year by the IPA, and what we were doing is sufficient. Just for those of you that don't know, it's an unfunded mandate, so some of these things are difficult to try to achieve in the staff that we have and the amount of time that we have, so we're doing the best we can, and as we kind of fine tune some of these things, we can work on increasing and adding different tasks as well to kind of hit other steps that are outlined, but there's just, they give you a guideline of some items that you can do, and we kind of pick a few, but there are definitely more that can be done.
Okay.
But again, it's just what we have available at the time.
The federal government has taken municipalities to court. The federal government has compelled municipalities through court orders to comply, so it's not as if it doesn't happen.
But it is quite cost prohibitive to try to do even for a municipality. I mean, to try to maintain these.
Funded mandate, yes,
Yeah.
it's 2002.
Right. So it's just, it is difficult for municipalities to keep it a Cadillac,
Sure.
It's just, nature's taking over, and so it's difficult. Anybody have any other comments or questions?
Question. We've heard when we've gone on tours down to the wastewater treatment plant, that some of the discharge that goes into the water is a lot of the farms and the pesticides. Do we have any control over any of those type of issues with any farms that, or even, some of it talked about toxic or hazardous material? Where does that extend to with yard treatments that could run off and go into the system?
Some of that, they're outside of most of them are outside of the corporate limits of the communities that would feed into the Fox River. So unfortunately, not all of the communities are part of that Fox River study group. So that is a constant battle and struggle. We also get a lot of runoff. The Fox River starts in Wisconsin, and it's a real big ag community up there. So those are things that are trying to be looked at right now. Last week, we started the King County Stormwater Ordinance Update, which is going to take 2 years, and both myself and Scott Haynes are on that as the Technical Advisory Committee, where we're going to be meeting monthly, give or take, for the next 2 years, and there is an ag consultant or a representative from the ag community there, so I know that that will be something that we can discuss there as well, but it is hard to monitor because it's, again, one of those economic things too with that, but they are harming the water with all those pollutants that just run off.
Do we have any farmlands that would be incorporated in that, and would we have any jurisdiction over that?
There are some properties that are farmed currently. I don't know what kind of chemicals they put on there, though. I don't know that anybody's ever looked into that.
It kind of falls under the education part of it, that telling or letting them know that pesticides and all those things are kind of harmful to the water, so it comes under that education part there.
Phosphates and lawn fertilizers, and homeowners are notorious for over fertilizing their properties.
Right.
And that actually has gotten better and better because of public education.
And that was when we was looking at the enforcement part of it. Is there anything that we've ever done or?
That's the ordinance that Andrea pointed out in there, so we have enforcement tools now to be able to do that if we want to.
Okay, thank you.
So go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna add that, I inherited a lot of hazardous materials cleaning out my father's home, and I researched and looked around where to do this, and the only place I found that was consistent is the city of Naperville.
Yes.
Where it works. And they have a whole system when you drive up and are able to do that. As far as I know, that's the nearest available location, but it's a big pressure on people with those kinds of things, where do they put them? So.
It is. Thank you for mentioning that because we are supposed to be responsible for dropping those off. I know King County does a green guide, and I think this year might have been the first year that they did not publish and distribute those through the newspapers in the area, but it can be found online. And so they do have the recycling locations for electronics. They have the hazardous waste that is at the Naperville Public Works every Saturday and Sunday, I believe it is. It might just be the second Saturday and Sunday, but there are some communities that do have pickups from their home, but I think those are the farther out west communities, such as Huntley and stuff like that.
We do collect a household hazardous waste fee through our solid waste collection and are looking to do that where we have a small bag program. So if somebody has, a can of motor oil or something, so we are looking to implement that where you could eventually you'll be able to leave it on your front porch in a bag and it'll come and get collected. So we're working on that.
What about unused or outdated prescription drugs?
Right down the hallway
Police department
by the police department.
has residents drop off.
I have one more question, just, to Marty's point, just to the east of us is Fermilab. And Fermilab is a major contributor to the Mahoney Creek tributary. And as that traverses all through the first ward, are they doing anything in Fermilab that could be polluting or anything harmful to the residents of the first ward?
I can reach out to the contact over there and see what they have on their program. It's something that I have not done at this point yet, but I'd be glad to reach out to
Yeah,
them.
if you would, please. I mean, I just know
They are so,
in that area, there are children who play in the Mahoney Creek tributary.
They're very environmentally
yeah,
focused.
Yeah,
they have tons of programs and are very careful about things. I mean, maybe they could have an accident, but
it would just be nice to know. Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And if you guys didn't, I can't remember if I said, there's a sign-in sheet going around. If you guys could all sign in from Batavia, anyone that lives in Batavia, I'd appreciate it. We have to keep this as record for our permit as well.
It is sitting in front of the mayor right now.
Right here.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thanks, Andrea. All right, the next item then is item number 6, which is ordinance 17-36. It's for a TIF grant and loan for Brianna's Restaurant at 10 through 30 North Island Avenue. Memo came from Chris Aston and Laura Newman. I don't even know where I got that. Alderman Wolf, or Alderman Stark, you gonna start us out with that?
Sure. Project background, Dino, Alex from Alex Group approached the city requesting financial assistance through a TIF redevelopment agreement for the purpose of undertaking interior and exterior remodeling improvements at 10 through 30 North Island to accommodate a new restaurant business. In total, the building remodel project represents nearly $500,000 in private investment. Of this total investment, Mr. Alex has submitted a list of permanent building improvement activities with cost estimates per bidding totaling an amount approximately $272,850. Mr. Alex is requesting a $25,000 matching grant and a $75,000 low-interest 2.75% loan totaling $100,000 in total TIF assistance. And Chris has stated what rolls up into the $272,850, and it includes things like sprinkler system, plumbing improvements, tower arch, a new window, stucco paint, thin brick panels, and that's in the matching grant activities. And then in the low-interest loan activities, electrical upgrades, HVAC, flooring, ceiling, carpentry, and awnings. So when you add the two totals for the grant and the low-interest loan, it equals $272,850. A little backstory on the restaurant, Brianna's Restaurant, and the exact name will be determined, will be the fourth family restaurant in this group of restaurants owned by Brianna and Alberto Jasso in Chicago. Their other restaurants are in South Elgin, Palatine, and Elburn, and they're very successful. They've got great Yelp reviews, between 4 and 4.7 out of 5. The plans for the proposed exterior improvements and signage are pending Historic Preservation Commission review, and the project plans are attached. So the grant request is $25,000 grant, and it's 9.2% of the total project. And Mr. Alex's ratio of private to public leverage is 9-to-1, is greater than 9-to-1. Low interest loan request, we would be loaning Mr. Alex $75,000 at the low interest rate of 2.75, and it'll be paid back over 5 years. And the principal will be $75,000 as well as $5,000 in interest approximately. The fiscal year 2017 TIF budget has sufficient funds to support this. Staffing impact is offset by permit fees. And timeline for action, the COW may presently consider and make a recommendation to full city council in this matter at our next meeting. And so the staff does recommend that we do approve the awardance of $25,000 in matching grant and a $75,000 low interest loan to the Alex Group in ordinance number 1736. Did I miss anything, Chris, except for describing the pictures?
I couldn't have written it better myself.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry I don't have the pictures readily available. They are in your packet. Just so you get an idea, essentially for the audience that is sitting here, and Mr. Alex is here, by the way, Dino Alex, with the property ownership of the election group, is here to answer any questions if you'd like. But when you look at the south facade of the 10, we call it 10-90 Allen Avenue, on the north end is Eliano's, on the south end is where the construction is ongoing. Right now, just to the interior of the building. But if you're looking at it on your right side, so that would be towards the east, there's a single tower, and then the building comes to a kind of a point in the middle and then tapers off on the west side of that facade. What we'll have is we'll have two towers, so there'll be a symmetrical balance of the towers on the right and the left, and they're going to round off the top of the building per the packet as you've seen, and they're going to actually add another window in that on that facade. So it'll be 3 large windows, and each will have an awning. So again, I don't have it to show here. The PDF didn't click on it for some reason, but anyway, you have it in front of you. So it's a substantial change. Just a little background, and then I'll again allow Mr. Alex to speak if the council would like that. But this actually goes back several months, and for people that have been watching, there's been construction activities going on in that space for a couple of 3 months for certain. Typically, you don't see too much activity going on until the grant starts moving forward. So this has been kind of on the come, but the hope has been that we would have a grant and a loan. But going back to the fall, when Mr. Alex first approached me with his son Bill about a grant and a loan to undertake this project, the couple things that came up right away was, okay, what tenant? Do we have a tenant, a bird in the hand? And we did with this Brianna's, and we looked into Brianna's, and it's really a very successful family restaurant, specifically in the breakfast, pancake, and lunch crowd. And then the second question was, well, what are we going to be spending money on? And it was fairly internal. Now, admittedly, everything was permanent. That's part of the grant program. So none of this is involved with all the kitchen equipment and the furniture and the lighting and any other kind of interior appurtenance. It's permanent improvements to the building, so those add value to the building. But they were all interior and not real glamorous, so to speak. You know, obviously things that were required greatly, the sprinkling system. So here we are through your grant program, adding more fire safety to one of your downtown buildings, which is a good thing. We're increasing the plumbing to the building because of that sprinkler system. We're also adding bathrooms and of course the kitchen equipment. But it didn't say much to the outside world. So, where's the wow factor for this grant? So we talked at length about, well, what can we do to the front of the building? And that kind of kicked in a whole new design process, so things were delayed. And that's been going back, and Jeff has been working really well with the developer and his builders to try to, or designers to try to get this thing done. It went to the Historic Preservation Commission last night. It still needs some fine tuning. So obviously, this grant, if moved to the council and the council approves, will clearly be predicated on getting the permit, and the permit will not be issued until the Historic Preservation Commission approves it. So that will still have to go through those hurdles. And in adding the exterior improvements, that's what kicked in the HPC review, but obviously it's to our benefit to make our buildings look good from a street perspective. So that, in a long-winded way, explains the delay, but also lets you know that we're still waiting for final approval, and that may take a couple, 3 more weeks. But again, no money will be issued. This is a reimbursement basis. So until the project components are done, the developer will have to show proof of payment, and waivers of lien must be given from the contractors, and then we can start paying out. So the grant, if in fact approved next, or June 5th, I guess, you won't see any money dispersed until the project nears completion, and again, that won't happen until the permit's been issued. So, do you have any questions?
Lucy?
I think it looks like a really worthy project.
Use the mic, please.
It looks like a worthy project. It looks good. I'm taking it that the but-for test does not apply here, even though we're using TIF funds.
No, this project is huge in scope. As it turns out, the $25,000 ends up being a very de minimis amount of the total project cost. He does need the loan. Obviously, the cost of money is real, and if he had a loan on the commercial market 5% or plus, over time, that is significant difference in financing costs. So this project makes it a more, I should say the funding through grant and loan makes it a more palatable project from the perspective of the developer in terms of pro forma and cost versus revenue.
Anyone else? Dan?
I would say moving forward, these loans probably need to start with a 3. I recognize we're not in the business of making a lot of money on interest, but 2.75 is.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the basis points going up, and I think actually the prime is at 4 now. So you're probably right. It's probably time to tweak that.
I remember asking the last time, how did we arrive at this number? And I believe it was the same number about 6 months ago. That's all.
Okay.
Anyone else? Marty?
Yeah, I'll throw, since it is the use of public funds, and what does the public think of this? And it got put out on several locations out on social media, and lo and behold, it's received almost unanimous support, favorable support for the actual look of it. So when everybody's kind of on the same sheet of paper, that's a good thing. And I think a lot of people really liked the front fascia forward of the along Wilson Street, so that it brought just a better look to walking down through there, that you're going to be more naturally pulled into the shopping center now.
I agree, and apparently this social media thing is really catching on.
It's a new thing.
I mean,
It's a fact.
I didn't know.
It's a fad, yeah. Dave?
Yeah, Chris, one of the requirements under this plan is that the owner pays contractors that pay or at least furnish prevailing wage certification.
Under the grant agreement, it reads, if the prevailing wage law applies, you must meet it. And I realize that sounds like kind of a bob and weave, but because the State Department of Labor website has evolved since the administration of Governor Rauner has taken hold, in that whereas here in the former administration with Pat Quinn, it was clear any use of public monies under tax increment financing, the prevailing wage will apply. Now what it says is there's a couple caveats. This one doesn't meet either one, but it essentially says if this is a public improvement project, right, then the public improvement must meet prevailing wage. However, if the entire project is done to private property, Am I right, Laura? It says it does not apply. Our position is, you know, we don't want to come out and say flat out doesn't apply. So if you read the RDA, it says if it applies, they're responsible. So say down the road, this project's being built, and Dino, this might be the first time you're hearing this, so maybe I should have told you earlier, but we're pretty confident that this project's going to be done before there's any change, at least in administration. But if someone, I guess, sues the city or otherwise makes a claim that, hey, you know, we understand that this project was done and they did not pay prevailing wage. It doesn't have to be union contractors, but it has to pay prevailing wage in their mind, and therefore, you know, there's a problem here. If they take it to court or otherwise it's somehow proven that, yes, prevailing wage did apply to this project, even though it's only private property, then the onus is on the developer to you know, address that. Because, again, the RDA reads, if it applies, it's on the developer.
Okay, yeah, I do see in here, it does say that if construction of any or all of the project improvements is subject to the prevailing wage, yeah, so it is.
And, you know, this was vetted through our attorneys, and
It's gone back and forth, like you said, based
Yes.
on the political wind. It's gone back and forth 4 times that I can think of now, whether it's required or not.
if there was additional public money involved, sometimes that kicks it in. It's convoluted, but we're confident from our perspective that A, we're covered by the RDA language, and B, our thinking is that it won't apply to this project.
Okay. And then the other item I have is for security. You know, restaurants are a very difficult business. We all know that, I think. And there is some language in here for security where the city, I guess you could say, I forget what the right language is in here, but the city has got the right to exercise any effort it feels as though it needs to, should there be a default in the loan. Is that enough language? I thought at one time I thought there was some language in there about, don't we put a lien on the property along with the loan?
Well,
And the lien is lifted when the loan's repaid?
The developer has to post a personal guarantee.
Yeah.
So if the business goes south, we can go after the property owner. In terms of lien, I don't believe we have applied a lien to the other RDAs.
But
I can't remember, maybe with the loan? No, we have not.
We haven't? So a personal guarantee is good enough?
That's what Kevin Brent advised us.
Okay. All right. I mean, I'm in favor of the project. I just want to make sure that we're covered.
And that's a good question.
You know, that's all I have. I support it.
Anyone else? Chris, can I ask what changes did Historic Preservation want made to the drawing we're seeing now?
Well, I want to be, I wasn't at the meeting, but I did get a report back from Drew Recka, who did attend. And as I understand it, the plans that were submitted were actually in some cases contradictory with one another in terms of color, for instance. And there also was an instance where where the HVAC equipment is behind the facade of the building, that appeared in one drawing but didn't in another.
Okay.
And so what they said was, and rightfully so really, give us a drawing that will reflect the actual building, including colors. If you look at what your exhibit shows, it'll say, you know, here, well, mine's not in color, but yours is. It'll show a green awning, and then there's a line that says, this is to be burgundy.
Yeah, I see that.
So they say, you know, just redraw it and make the colors are what they are. They're not against it, they're not opposed to the design as I understand it, they just,
Needed clarification.
yeah, they want to make sure whatever they approve is what's shown in the file.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't anything significant, so that if we approve this or didn't approve this and send it on to city council, it's something that would be a surprise, you know, down the line.
Well, in either case,
It's got to go through.
he's got to get the HPC approval to get a permit unless they appeal, and then you'll hear about it.
Okay.
So Susan, I guess the only other question I have would be, when's it going to open?
Yeah, there you go. And
Well,
is
finally a
Mr.
question
Alex-
for
yeah, I
Mr.
was gonna
Alex.
say, Mr. Alex, would you like to come up and talk to the council?
My name is Dino Alex. I'm one of the owners. The question is when they're going to open up. Last night we were here and we had the material, the colors, and whatever Jeff, I guess, asked for us to do, and then we did it. The thing was that on the rendering was not the brick that we're going to use, but we show him the brick that we're going to use. But because that was not on the rendering, we're going to have to wait another 3 weeks. That would delay us. And we want to open up as soon as possible, because every day that goes by, we're losing money. And I have to say something about this building. Years ago, we had a deal with the Walgreens and McDonald's, and the deal did not go through. But we advertised that we're going to knock the building down. So everybody left, and we end up with an empty building. The $25,000 will be good. We're going to buy some dishes. Thank you very much.
You know, while you're still up there, I got to make a comment, though. I remember probably 8 years ago, when the city council first started having some conversation about doing streetscape, there was a committee that was formed, and there were a lot of public hearings, public meetings.
Understand that.
And I remember meeting you up at the Park District meeting, up there, up the Park District office.
Yes.
And you stood up, and you were really kind of upset because we were going to spend all this money on streetscape. And I don't think you were a believer at that time that if we spend money on streetscape, things will turn around. You said, why are you going to spend all this money on all this stuff? What's it going to do for me? Well, now I see streetscape has happened. You're making an investment. Here we are working together as a public-private partnership on this grant and loan, and you're improving your building, and you're going to make everything better. So I think it's worked out pretty well.
Well, that's why we're spending the money, and we're spending a lot of money. We did not know that these people that want to go in there, they want 200 seats. By doing that, we have to put a sprinkler system.
Yeah.
We've got to put a spray installation to protect that. We never had an idea we were going to do that. That's $70,000 just for that.
Yeah.
So that project's very expensive. I'm very glad to spend the money, believe me, because I like to see something better on the street. The thing that I heard the other day was that you're going to approve another Italian restaurant. You spend so much money on the street for a couple of Italian restaurants.
What is it with these Italians? I don't get it.
They're not Italian.
Great.
Okay, so I don't know.
Mr. Alex, I have to say, I was walking by and stopped and stuck my head in and saw what they've been doing there. It looks terrific. It's very exciting to see what's happening in that space. And do you know, are they going to do any outdoor seating or anything so people can eat outside?
Well, I appreciate if the mayor will cut the ribbon before we open up, and you all are invited for a free breakfast and lunch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much,
Well,
and
thank you.
I believe in this city, believe me.
Oh, we
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing it opened up. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We can't do that, unfortunately. That would be against the rules. As much as we'd like a free breakfast or lunch, we can't.
Any other questions?
$75 limit, we're good.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any comments, questions, concerns? Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion by somewhere over there, Elliott. Second by Callahan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Okay, so it goes to city council. I think the first meeting is June 5th. It will be the first city council meeting. It'll go there, but obviously, as Chris mentioned, there won't be any further movement with it until it goes to HPC and gets a building permit. Thank you.
Is that a regular agenda item or consent?
That should go on regular agenda.
Yeah, definitely regular, so we can talk about it. Is there any way to move it through HPC more quickly if they get the drawing done faster, so that we don't delay their project any longer?
The next meeting, yeah. If they can get the drawing, and I'll be speaking with Mr. Alex tomorrow about that.
Okay. And so when,
If they can get the drawing in by next week, we can get it done the first week in June,
oh, that would be terrific.
which is still a couple weeks.
Yeah, but it's still faster than,
Okay, the next
We're
item is
fasting.
item 7, which is the discussion on the Plan Commission reappointments. Alderman Wolf, you going to start us out with that?
Sure. We all got a memo from Roman on the kind of a little bit of history and the realities of what the legal side of it is for term limits and all the things that are given to us from the state, and then the background that we have from what we've done as the city. And I guess we'll just open it up to start off the discussion of where we want to go with this. Do we want to just go around the room and everybody can say what we want to say?
I don't, at this
Right.
point, I don't have anything to say. I voted in favor of the appointment, so I'm not,
Because I guess one of my things and one of the reasons why I asked to talk about this was, I think at some point, whenever we appoint somebody originally, when the mayor appoints somebody originally to any of these positions, or anyone is appointed to fill a position on the council or anything else we do, we have some discussion about the desire of the candidate, of what their ideas, what they bring to the table, and what their input would mean to the whatever commission or whatever position they'd be in. And I think that in some respects, we've kind of skipped that on some of this. And I think it's become more apparent to me that we need to be aware of what we're really asking people to do when we appoint them to a commission, and what we expect from them, and what they understand as basically their charge when they're on a committee or a commission. I mean, I think it's something that's important that we have people that want to be there, that want to have input, that understand what they're being asked to do and the different things that are put before them. I just feel like I've seen a lot of change in just the attitudes of some of the people that are on the committee. I'm not afraid to say it. I think it just is amazing to me when we have people that sit on a committee and say, well, it doesn't matter what we do. And that, to me, says that they're not really involved in what they're supposed to be there for. And that's frustrating to me, because I think, at least for myself and many others that are sitting up here, I think we take it really seriously what we're asked to do on a weekly basis, or a meeting every time we're up here. So I guess that's kind of what I want to get out there and see what people think before we reappoint people.
Yeah, I think my,
Mark?
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I was on the Plan Commission in North Aurora, and it was at times an awkward position, I guess, because we had our view of what we thought was right, and we'd give our recommendation, and it would get knocked down. The city council, the trustees, they would say, oh, no, we're gonna go in this direction. And it's hard. So I get it, it's hard. But it is part of the job, and it felt in what I've seen recently that they didn't like that that was part of the job. And I think they want to be on it. I think the mayor figured that out. We can put that off to the side. They want to be on it. They want to continue to do this, but the challenge is, can they accept that not everything is going to go the way they want it to? And like I said, that was a hard part for me, being on the Plan Commission, is you put your heart and soul into it, and you go and you read everything, and you go do all this work, and then something changes. The thing I never did, though, is not put in the work, and I think that's what some of us are questioning, is whether the work was actually done, or if it was just, it doesn't matter anymore, and got pushed off.
Well, and if I may, sorry, just to kind of stand on top of that, and I realize this latest Plan Commission circulation of meetings was really about probably one of the biggest projects in our city's history. So definitely a lot of stress and tension there. But I heard on multiple occasions, nothing to do with, the two that instigated this subject coming to our attention, that I don't know a thing about this or that. And so to Mark's point, putting in the work beforehand, I don't want what is probably one of the first faces to a developer coming to our city, especially at this integral point in time where we're starting to see a lot of action, things blossoming, projects getting underway. I don't want that to be one of the first faces is, why am I having to go before a panel if somebody's going to say they don't know a thing about what this is? So I in particular wanted to see perhaps we outline some form of why this person is qualified for this commission, whether that's the Plan Commission or any other commission, because I think those qualifications, much like any other public job or private job for that matter, has to be pretty clear that this person is qualified to do this.
Marty?
Yeah, there's two separate issues, and I think the memo that Roman drafted lays out my thinking on both of these. The first one being kind of some of the technical issues that we have regarding length, qualifications, so on and so forth. We have inconsistent ordinances amongst all our boards. Some are 3, depending on which board, some are 3 years, some are 5 years, some are this. The HPC, to what you're stating of listing out qualifications, is spelled out there. It completely lays out what the qualifications are expected of that position. One of the boards is that the person serving on the board can be removed after not attending 1/3 of the meetings, and another one says you must attend 3/4 of the meeting for another board. So there's all kinds of, we have all these different boards, yet there's no set standard as to what the expectations are amongst these boards. And it kind of lends to some confusion. Well, if this, then what? And we're constantly trying to look at that. Because when we're going to the qualifications, the last appointments that we had for this board were for Tom Lalonde and Tom Goslin back in December, which were for the June. And in the report for that, it laid out qualifications for why these people were specified for this position. It stated so-and-so is an attorney, so-and-so is an architect, so-and-so has this experience and that experience. And we did not see that in this memo, which then leads to the kind of the second part of it, which is if there are personnel issues that are related, I believe that those should be discussed as it states in the memo of being an executive session, because those are issues that should not be discussed out in the public, because developers, residents, other people have brought specific concerns not related to one project or another, stating why they do not or do want so-and-so on or off this board. And in order to have those discussed without unduly embarrassing someone, or putting, saying this developer thinks this of that person, that doesn't promote goodwill within the city. People should be able to let us know what their concerns are about someone, and we should be able to freely discuss it, but also be mindful of the people that are on that board, that they're given the respect to not have their business thrown out there for everybody to see. It's what we do on all personnel matters.
Lucy?
I think I'm fine with having this sort of discussion. I think it makes a lot of sense. I feel the timing is off because we're talking about the appointment of 2 individuals that have a history with the Plan Commission. So we kind of have familiarity with them. And it looks or feels to me as though we're trying to evaluate these individuals, and I'm uncomfortable with that. So that is why I did not feel that we should delay the appointment of these individuals. So I'm completely in favor of the discussion and agree with a lot of what's being said, but I'm uncomfortable kind of waiting on this appointment for 2 individuals that have a history with Batavia and have been serving the Plan Commission for a while and have expressed an interest in serving again. So
I appreciate your thinking on that, and I understand it. but this is the first time that these appointments are coming to us. The first, under the new rules, one of them is coming for the very first time ever. So this is the time that we would discuss it, because it's their first time after having been appointed for the end of that term. So if you then let it go another 5 years, which I'm unsure what the language in this means, because it states the state statute is 5 years, but the mayor cannot appoint past his term. So are we only appointing for 4? Those are the technical questions, but we are deciding the history at this point, because we are deciding whether or not that history makes the determination for the next one, because you can't say the time you're supposed to decide is, well, it's coming to us for the first time, let's push it off. Well, when would we discuss that?
Well, we could have discussed it before, being a little more proactive, or whatever we decide tonight is based on things going forward. I feel like holding these 2 appointments in the air like this is making people, I would think, I've not talked to people about this, making them feel uncomfortable.
Susan?
I have a couple things that I'd like to bring up. The first is that, and I asked this question specifically, how do people get appointed? And, I know that it's appointed by the mayor, but I also think, based on the fact that we've had an open seat since October, that we need to set a time limit here so that seats don't stay unfilled for an overly long length of time, that there is some urgency to fill a seat on the Plan Commission if one opens up, so that we continue to always have a quorum, et cetera, because if there are X amount of people, we should have those people in the seats. So that was one thing that came out of this memo. Another thing was how the Plan Commission acts as an advisory board, because, I've been on the other side of it. I've been on HPC, another advisory board, and when something came before us, it was Jeff would say, okay, here is how our code, or the things you have to be mindful of in HPC, how this applies to this project, and then we weighed the project against that, whether it was a study or whatever else. So it was a little disconcerting to come to Plan Commission meetings or watch them streamed and see the Plan Commissioners would say, I understand there's a study, and I understand that staff has said this is how this works and how we are supposed to look at it with regard to the study, and to hear Plan Commissioners say, yeah, that's all great, but in my personal opinion, I'm voting against this because I don't think the studies are accurate. And that's where I thought we need to kind of figure out the direction of how decisions are made, because otherwise the decisions that come to us, again, are not based on fact.
We have done that as a council. We have disregarded our consultant's advice also. So, I understand, I guess, another body can do that, because we have done it. But I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But like when we give them a charge and we say, okay, this is what you're supposed to talk about, here are the parameters we'd like you to decide upon tonight, this is your venue of what you're supposed to look at. Well, we can talk about whatever we want, is the statement that's made after that. The city council can tell us what to do, but we're going to talk about whatever we want. And if we want to talk about height or mass, we can talk about it. So that's a frustration for me when they're supposed to do one job of, okay, we're going to decide whether or not they get the variance on something, but yet I don't like the design of it. Well, design isn't discussed in that point. All you're supposed to be talking about is the variance. So when you're there to do one job, you should do that one job. And then when you're supposed to do the second job, you do the second job. So that's, I think, where the process part of it has gotten to me when I see that type of stuff happen. And it doesn't matter who it happens to, whether it's somebody working on their house or somebody building 186 units. I think that, again, it goes to what developers are going to think of the first part of the process they have to deal with here. And if we are telling a group that this is what they're supposed to focus on and look at and what they're supposed to rule on, that to me is pretty simple, and you stay within those bounds. So I think from the process side of it, that's one of the reasons I didn't want to vote for it, is because I wanted to talk about this before we make appointments. Because I think it's something that has to factor in to to what we expect or what we ask them to do. And I don't discount any of their service, I just want to say that, you know, you're expected to do one thing, and that's what I think you need to do.
I think you make a really good distinction, which is why, to Lucy's point, that we are different. We have different rules upon which we can or don't have to accept. We make the final decision on these things. We can weigh everything, something over here can make us waive something, and something make us put a little more credibility to another thing. But that's our role, is to make the decision on it. That role for the planning board and the zoning board is to make a recommendation based upon the evidence that is presented to them. That is a vastly different thing. And if the decisions are not based on evidentiary decisions, but based on personal opinion or other factors that are not brought before them outside of the public hearing, then you can question whether or not that job is not being done correctly. And if that job is not being done correctly, that is where our role does come in with the advice and consent, where we make the approval of this. If we don't feel that someone is doing their job or their role for whatever reason, that is our job to do that. Because if the oversight for us then is if we're not doing our job and people don't agree with our decisions, the voters don't choose us. It is a pecking order, and it will always be that pecking order. Because otherwise there would be, whenever a new president comes in, there's no oversight. You just put in the person that you want. They have the hearings for that very reason.
Alan, to finish exactly what Marty said, and I guess that it's disconcerting because when recommendations, whether it's this project or any other project, come to us, it says, you know, that it was voted on by the Plan Commission with a 4-2 or whatever the margin is, or unanimous or all against or whatever. But it's not like with footnotes, it was in their personal opinion that the parking study was inaccurate. It's just voted against it, or that the traffic study was inaccurate. It's just, so it's, you know, there's a study that's been done that they're supposed to focus on, and we take those recommendations because of that evidentiary part of this, you know, and if it's, we have to factor in personal opinion, then it doesn't help me make decisions.
Well, and I think we also have to remember too that there are some things that they do have the final say on. When they get in design review, if they like it or they say, okay, you have 17 conditions, and the developer says, sure, I'll meet those, I can work with that, they're done. I mean, we don't have the oversight to go back in and say, we don't like you know, that you decided to let them use Merlot instead of Burgundy or whatever, you know, the little semantics of it are. That they do have that final say, and I think that that's something in my mind that I think that we trust them with, and we have asked them to have that responsibility and that duty to put, you know, their input in on it.
For clarity, though, the city council does have the final say on that.
If
Plan Commission makes the decision, but we've got, what is it, Roman, 24 or 48 hours after Plan Commission makes a ruling. If one alderman doesn't like their ruling, we can put an objection to it, and or the developer.
I believe it's only if the petitioner.
What is it?
There's a 10-day appeal period that can happen. So if somebody has an issue with something that.
The developer can appeal, but can't a city council member also?
City council can, staff can.
Yeah.
You know, there's certain people that can, you know, actually object.
So the
to it.
city council ultimately does have final decision. We've put that charge onto the Plan Commission because we wanted them to take that charge. We wanted to be out of that. We wanted to think more policy. We wanted them to do more in-depth.
Right, and that's why I think that, you know, from that respect, that's another reason why I think we as the council owe it to the public to actually ask some questions up front of a reappointment or an appointment. You know, what does, you know, if somebody is an architect or as an attorney or as, you know, just a citizen with interest that's on one of these commissions or one of these boards, I think it is important to know, again, what they feel like they can bring to the table when they come out. I mean, the same thing that we go through if you're running a contested race and the voters have to choose between A or B, that's what they're going to look for.
And I think the part of the process that you had said about making the distinction between the two and the appeal process, I know that it was said that by members of our board that they were concerned about things that were said at the appeal process. But the appeal process is actually part of the statute or of the ordinance that the developer is bringing before us. And we are supposed to look at the decision, how it was decided, and agree with it or not. And that was what we're supposed to do. It wasn't us saying, we're going to pick apart your decision. The developer said, I need you to look at this, and we have to look at it in order to make a decision.
Paula, you're up next.
So I didn't want to focus so much on the One North Washington project, but some of my concerns and the reasons I wanted to have this discussion was because 5 years is a very long term, and I have heard other comments from other projects that have concerned me. So that was some of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion too.
Roman, maybe you can address this. Is there anything we can do as a council with home rule power to change the term? I mean, can we do it concurrent with, mayor making appointments either within his term or until the end of his term? I mean, is that something we can do, or is it truly by state statute that we have to limit it at 5, or that it has to stay at 5?
Well, I was talking with Kevin about this too, and there's actually a difference in the statute between the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Plan Commission. And the way Batavius has set this up is that basically the Plan Commission is the Zoning Board of Appeals because the Zoning Board of Appeals really doesn't have a whole lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
Under the state statute, the Zoning Board of Appeals term is 5 years. Under the Plan Commission statute, under the Illinois statute, the council has the authority to set the term. The council has set the term at 5 years under the ordinance.
Okay.
Whether or not that technically violates the abilities to make an appointment beyond the mayor's term, that's a question I honestly didn't find the answer to. It may, but then we get to the point, well, it's a holdover appointment until somebody else is appointed to that seat, that person still holds it anyways. So if the council wants to maybe relook at doing the term to a shorter period of time, we do feel that there's the authority to do so under the city's home rule authority.
But that would only be for the Planning Commission, not for the Zoning Board of Appeals.
I would actually think we'd have the ability under the Zoning Board of Appeals to reduce that to 4 as well. And that's what Kevin and I had talked about as well, but that's going to be changing the Zoning Board of Appeals term as well. And you have these current members on there that are currently serving
So it
5.
couldn't be for anybody that's currently on, it would only be into the future.
Correct.
So I think that may be discussions that may be ongoing, and we have to decide, what we want to do that. And I think, one, it was good to start this discussion and get these things out here. I think it is important that we look at trying to match some of the requirements that we have across the different commissions that we have, so that way it doesn't, well, if I want to be on the bike commission, I don't have to meet anything, or if I'm on the planning commission, I don't have to do this, or I don't have to do that, for the environmental. I think that they should all have some similar formats to them, so that way, no matter what commission you would be on or would want to try to be on, that there are similar requirements for it. I mean, I think that that's something, if we could standardize that or a way to make those as similar as they could be, I think that would be the best thing. Does anybody have anything else? Do you want to say anything? Your Honor?
I was wanting to hear what
All right,
everybody else
right.
said before I said anything.
Oh, Nick, you want to get in before the mayor?
Sure, go ahead.
Probably. No, I think it's a good conversation, but I think we're missing a key part. Our intentions are good in that something went awry here. I'm for these appointments. I don't have a problem with them being frustrated. them having passion, them having their own opinions. I think that's great, and if somebody didn't care, I wouldn't want them on the board anyways. I don't think the issue is with these specific people or who we appoint. The issues are gonna occur with whoever we appoint, and the discussion we're not having is, how do we communicate this? We should be sitting down with each of these boards and saying, here's your roles, here's how we should communicate, here's our expectations, what are your expectations, what are your frustrations? These are the things we need to be doing. It doesn't, this type of thing can happen with anybody who's appointed. And I think we're looking at what happened and trying to figure out a way around it and just kind of missing the beat a little bit.
Well, see, and that's the thing I think is that we need to make sure that we are okay with what is identified as their charge or their duties. And I think that we have to be okay and have identified all that. And then I think that the plan commissioners need to understand and accept what they signed up for or what we've asked them to do. And then we also have to be accepting of what they do when they're working within the requirements that they've been given. So I think that's where I think some of our disconnect is, you know, especially evident over the last year or two. Scott?
Yeah, and that goes in line with what we were thinking as staff to do is, you know, we wanted you all to have this discussion to talk about, you know, the concerns and things like that. But we think it would be very productive to have a joint meeting with the council and the plan commission. But we wanted to hold off until we had this discussion. But and also so we don't have a lot on their agenda because we want to, you know, have enough time for us to all talk about it. I would agree with you. I think it's important for you to talk to the plan commission so they can understand, you know, your concerns, your thoughts about, you know, what they're doing and their role, and also so that they can reflect on, you know, what their thoughts are also on what they're hearing from the community and what happens at public hearings. I mean, I know a number of you were at many of the public hearings, so you know and understand that. But I think it's a valuable communication on both sides to bring that forward and to have that joint meeting to talk about, you know, everything that's out there.
Right, and I think it's important, like Nick said, I don't want to discourage people from disagreeing about something that they don't like or something that they don't want. I think that's good. I think it has to fall within what are the parameters of what the meeting's supposed to be about. Because, you know, I notice, and we've done this a few times, I've done it myself, where we waste time talking about things that we don't need to talk about. Or we waste time doing things during a meeting, and we were supposed to talk about the 7 things that we had to agree or disagree on, and we wait till the last 15 minutes to put those 7 things out there and talk about them. And then we blast through it in 15 minutes and we're done. And what do we do for the last 3 hours? So I think that's another thing that, if one thing comes out of it, if we streamline any of the processes that we have to make things go smoother, I think it helps both of us out, both the council and the commissions.
I just want to say, I think Nick hit it exactly on the head. I agree with everything you said. I think it's fantastic. So I would support it.
The last 15 minutes.
And I'm not even qualified to be on this board.
They voted for you.
Says he who just got elected. Your Honor, you're up.
Thank you. I just want to, you know, I'm not in an argumentative mood here because I really subscribe to some of the ideas that are being espoused here. One is that I do feel that the 5-year term is too long for any of these, and that we should probably look to try to reduce it back to the 3 that it had been for a number of years. That being said, just to give you a little history here, I cannot underestimate or stress more strongly the need that we have a plan commission that is argumentative, that makes statements and tells developers, well, I don't like the way you're doing this, we need to change this, or, you know, and maybe some of and I've over the years sat here as a newspaper reporter and then as the mayor and seen a lot of good come from the argumentative parts of the plan commission. Where I come from with the plan commission, there's been a long history here that there's always been a couple of people on the Batavia Plan Commission who are sitting here with history. And I say that they've lived in the community a long time and they've been serving on that board a long time. And you need to look no further than right outside here to the Peg Bond Center. And Peg Bond, I believe, was the first chairman of the Batavia Plan Commission, and maybe it was whenever it was created, like 1950. And she stayed on that plan commission, I believe, till 1978. So she was on for 28 years. And, you know, if you look at some of the things that she did in her career as a plan commission chairman, some of which I didn't agree with, but she brought some building codes, she brought some sign controls, she brought all kinds of new streetscape ideas. There was a lot of very creative stuff done by her. And then after, you know, she left the plan commission, there was a couple of guys, Bill Hamilton, who we have a street named after him out in the industrial park. And he had been on the city council and then got appointed to the plan commission, was very instrumental because he sat there with a lot of history. Then we had a guy by the name of Bill Van Santen that personally I didn't agree with much, but he was an attorney out of Chicago. And he had a lot of interesting ideas. So it's good to get these provocative people, I would tell you, that sit on these plan commissions. So in the case of the two that I submitted to you the other night for appointment, that's my history right now in the Batavia Plan Commission. Those two, Gene Schneider served 16 years on the city council, much of which he was the chairman of the CDC. And Sue Peterson brings a lot of background and history from a variety of fronts to the Batavia Plan Commission. So I'm passionate that they really have something to offer at this moment in time when we're looking at some significant things coming on our doorstep here that really need to be analyzed and poked at and shot at, and you know, other alternative suggestions come from it so that we get, hopefully at the end of the day, which is the very best stuff that we have. I just want to go a little bit into how the Plan Commission's been formulated and during my tenure. There was a time before I was mayor one time when somebody pointed out that of the 7 members on the Batavia Plan Commission, 6 of them lived on the west side of town. And there was only 1 that lived on the east side of town. And there was no, and so when I got elected, I suggested to the council, and I guess we adopted it as kind of informal policy, that as a criteria for the Batavia Plan Commission, we have at least 1 person in each one of the 4 quadrants of town. In other words, southeast, southwest, northwest, and northeast. And right now, the reason that I hadn't appointed the person because we are short, is it was Ed Weiss was on, and he was going through some kind of up and down health, and he was talking to me, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to quit." And then he says, his wife said, "Oh, I don't want him to quit. He really needs to keep doing this." So we went back and forth on that for a while. Then he finally did submit to me his letter of resignation, but when that came, we were getting right in the middle of the Washington Avenue thing, and I really questioned whether it would be wise to bring somebody in, new off the street, who would come into the middle of that conversation and didn't have the history on it. So I've got somebody in mind that that's living on the northeast side, and I've talked to the 2 aldermen from that part of town, and both of them think the guy is a pretty good choice. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But so there is going to be another person on here, but right now, you know, I guess I would suggest that maybe if we want to take a look at this ordinance and these terms and maybe pick up on some of the suggestions that Alderman Cerrone or Alderman Wolf have made, which I think are all viable things, that, you know, we'll just let those on the commission just continue to serve until we reappoint them, but that'll give us a chance to maybe look at these terms and everything else, and maybe we reappoint everybody from this day forward to a 3-year term. That would be a suggestion I would have, because I think that we do, but we need to have some continuity, and most importantly, we need to have some history on the Plan Commission. And, you know, specifically the 2 that are up for appointment now do bring that history part of this thing to it. And, you know, we had another good person on the Plan Commission for another number of years, in the person of Jim Hansen. And like Schneider, he had been the chairman of the Community Development Committee, or they used to call it Planning, Zoning, and Annexation. I believe this is back when Dave's father was mayor and Art Swanson before him. I think Jim Hansen was chairman of that commission, or that committee of the council, for like 22 years, something like that. Then he retired from that and got elected county superintendent of schools, and then we retired from that. I solicited him and said, "Would you like to come back on the Plan Commission?" He said, "Yeah," and so he stayed, I believe, 15 years, and now he died on us, basically, what happened there. So, I mean, but we've always had this history thing, and I don't mean to have it all history people. I think right now we've got a pretty broad, but right now, the way the Plan Commission's broke up, I've got 3 people from the northwest side. I have nobody from the northeast side, but we're gonna change that. I've got 1 person from the southwest side, and I've got 2 people from the southeast side. So that's kind of the way it is. So right now, we'll have, on the Plan Commission, there would be 4 from the west side and 3 from the east side, which is more, and I say that because I think you have to be a bit territorial here, because things happen in some other part of town, and you may not be the alderman, or you may not be the Plan Commission person, and do you really care what somebody else may, there may be some neighborhood angst down there that needs to be brought into the conversation. So I think it's important that you keep somebody on the Plan Commission that has something to say about what's happening in their part of town.
Well, and I will say, just, and I guess in some defense of the Plan Commission, I think it doesn't matter where the commissioners that are on the council, or on the Plan Commission now are from, because I think it's not just about where they live or where they identify with. I think they really do truly look at what they think is best for the city as a whole.
I'll tell you
I mean, that's something I think I've enjoyed the whole time I've been on this council, is people aren't territorial and say, well, it's in your ward, I really don't care about it. I mean, that's something I think, and maybe that's something that you've fostered, but I really feel like that doesn't really come into play here.
I think you just touched on the elephant in the room. It is politics.
Well,
Is this job meant to be an academic job where they're looking at specific parameters, or is it somewhat political? And I think that's where things kind of went off the rail here, is that they got accused of being influenced by politics.
I don't know about that, but I would tell you that if all of you are sitting here and all of a sudden some big thing happens in your ward from a Plan Commission perspective, and you're gonna have some people breathing down your back about, what do you mean there's nobody from the southeast side of Batavia on the Plan Commission? What do you mean there's nobody from my neighborhood that even has any voice or vote on this thing? That's there, and I've seen it. I mean, you can call it political, or you can call it territorial, or whatever you want to call it, but it's a real thing. And I don't know, it's not unique to Batavia. I've talked to other mayors recently, and everybody's kind of got the same conversations going about, who's on the Plan Commission and who's peddling themselves and who's doing whatever. And it all gets back to, there's an element of politics in it, pure and simple. But in the same token, I think historically, the people we've had on our Plan Commission have certainly controlled those politics. And, while they may take think of the conversations we had about the Walgreens store, or think of the conversations we had about the McDonald's. Should we get rid of the drive-through window? I mean, there's a lot of ideas that are fostered and debated and cogitated about. And at the end of the day, historically, we always seem to be able to get ourselves pretty much on the right course of action here. So.
Okay, so where do we want to go from here?
This was just a discussion, right? I mean, we.
But I mean, we have some appointments that I think, now that we've had our discussions about it, do we want to have a joint meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals, Plan Commission, maybe even the HPC, and look at where do we go from here? Do they want more input as to where we think their charges, or what we want them to do and what we want them to focus on? How far do we want them to go on stuff? How far do they want to go on things? I mean, I think that this is an important conversation to have to go forward, because I think we don't want to leave things the way they are, the way it's been going. I think we want to make things better for both them and for us, and for the processes that we have in place.
Well, I think to Marty's point, I mean, just tightening up all of the different commissions and saying what the attendance has to be, what the length of appointments are, and what their charges are. And I would say that, when I was elected to city council, I mean, I still run across advisory boards that I don't know what they do exactly. Like the Environmental Commission, I found out so much more about them now because I followed their Facebook posts. But before that, I didn't even really know who was on that board and what they did and who they were advising to. So, it would be good to really kind of, learn who these groups are and what they do and why they're doing it and how it fits together with city council.
What we're talking about is not connected to these appointments, though, so procedurally, we probably should advise that the council do vote on the mayor's appointments and then have these discussions separately, because it should not appear to be tied, and it does look like it's appeared to be tied to it right now.
I agree with that. I think this has got to be divided into three different
Right,
areas.
and I think unfortunately, in my mind, if we didn't stop this process at the point we were at, we weren't going to get to talk about this. So, or we weren't going to force ourselves to talk about it. So I think unfortunately, it is what it is, and I'm glad we did what we did, so we're here.
I guess the question I would have, well, two things I see coming out of this is one is a joint meeting to talk about, various issues and things. But I guess the other part is the appointment, because right now, the appointment as it's being presented to you is for a 5-year appointment. Is this something that you would rather us change the ordinance to change it to the 3-year appointment period now?
I think
Before we do that?
we should, and if we have to go back and say, you know what, legally we can't because you found something that says we can't do that, then we change it at that point. But I would like to see it at 3.
Right.
And then every one from here on out stay at 3.
Right, right.
And I think our other commissions are they all at 3? Even if they're staggered year to year, I think the other ones are at 3. And I think it's something that, like Susan says, we should pay more attention to some of the things that we ask people to do and be more aware of what they are doing.
So is the order of events, change the ordinance, do the appointments, have a meeting?
Right. Move forward.
I just have a question. If the research turns out to be that we can change the Plan Commission term to 3 years, but we may not change the Zoning Board of Appeals term from 5 years, or the most we would be able to reduce it is 4 years, what are your feelings on keeping those two bodies combined as opposed to having them be separate?
I'd like to be able to see them combined because I think a lot, and I think that the plan commissioners could speak better to this. I think a lot of the decisions they have to make are so hooked together on those two things. Whether it's a planning issue or whether it's a zoning component of it, I think that those are always together, it seems like.
Right, and if I may speak to that, is I've worked for communities that have had it both ways, and to be honest, the combined commission works much better.
Okay.
It also saves the development process cost and time, because if somebody needs, a rezoning and they also need variances, they're gonna have to have 2 separate public hearings instead of in front of 2 separate bodies, plus the notices and all that.
We don't need to add any more to the
Exactly,
processes we have. We have enough of those.
Right.
Marty?
I do have, regarding these appointments, though, issue that I would like to bring in executive session under personnel.
Okay, we can do that. We have an executive session scheduled for tonight. Okay, that it for this one? Staff knows where we want to go with what we've
Thanks,
answered.
Scott.
Okay.
Item 8, Resolution 16-77-R, pledging property tax funds for stormwater capital maintenance. Memo out of engineering, and Alderman Wolf, I believe this would be city services also.
Okay, give me 1 second here, Dave.
My screen keeps going black. I don't know.
It could be public utilities, but it's going to be city services tonight. You know what? I'll let you start this off, Gary, because I can't get it to open up here.
Sure. We were asked at budget time to come back, and so really tonight's goal is to start working towards a consensus for funding related to stormwater and what mechanisms the city wants to do to accomplish that. Before we get into that, we really got to step back about 5 years. Back in 2012, we had quite a number of debates about the need for stormwater funding and how much stormwater funding was needed. Staff had identified a number of projects back then, and I'll submit to council that the vast majority of those projects still exist, and it's 5 years later, and those projects are all now still more expensive to construct. So projects are not going to go away. Infrastructure is getting older, and I think in the last couple of years, especially after the June 2015 storm, council has really seen the importance of stormwater, and the council has talked many times in the last couple of years about the importance of stormwater. Back when we first started talking in 2012, we were not considering the combined sewer areas. Those were kind of outside of the conversation. They showed themselves kind of as being an issue most recently again with the big storms, and of course now we're actively working in the combined sewer areas. So Rahat and I were just talking a couple days ago, you know, between Area 3, which is a combined sewer area on the southwest side of town, and Ward 1, the southeast side of town, those two areas alone, we can come up with $10 million worth of projects just off the top of our heads. And that's just those two areas. That's nothing else that we've been talking about, you know, over the last 5 years. So there's no shortage of projects that need to get done. It's a matter of how to fund them, and then obviously these things can't happen overnight. They have to happen over the course of years and basically chip away at them. So since the last 5 years, we've talked about different funding mechanisms. There are things like special service areas. That's actually a very viable method that a lot of communities use, but it's not really something we've discussed here, where we could go into a neighborhood, Area 3 area is a good example, go into that area and put it to a vote to all those people, and they could vote to give themselves a special tax, a special service area to pay for their own improvements. It's just not a funding mechanism that the city has used, and I don't know that right now would be a good time to jump into that funding mechanism, but it's a viable mechanism that other communities have used. Grants and low-interest loans, those are also out there, but to be honest with you, grant funding is almost all but dried up. Low-interest loans take specific criteria, you know, related to like the combined sewers. Again, really probably not the best and most viable funding sources. The biggest sources we've always talked about for the last couple of years have been property taxes and a stormwater utility. There are pros and cons to both of those approaches, and we've had actually fairly long discussions on both of those approaches at the city council level. And it's because of in the last couple of years, city council has voted to increase stormwater funding, and now this year, as part of the budget process, you asked us to bring this back to have this discussion, to talk about how we may want to fund stormwater improvements going forward. Stormwater utility is you know, just kind of pros and cons of both sides. Stormwater utility is pretty difficult to administer. It takes basically, you know, a fair amount of upfront work to identify properties and go through the formulations in order to identify what those properties will have to pay under a stormwater utility. Long-term, then, that needs to be continued to be administered, whereas a property tax is just, I mean, it's just kind of, it's very easy to administer. It's obviously just a tax that's imposed on property owners. Stormwater utility applies to schools and churches who are tax exempt. Obviously, property tax will not apply to those entities. And you can keep going the pros and cons back and forth of all these funding, of the two funding mechanisms. I guess in the end, staff is of the notion that, you know, there's no shortage of projects. We need to find a funding source. We need to have a source that's reliable and dedicated going forward. You know, right now the state of Illinois is contemplating, you know, property tax freeze. So maybe that's a negative against the property tax side. We have all talked about, you know, our wastewater treatment plant, and we know we're going to probably have to raise sewer fees. So as people get their monthly bills, their bills are already going to be going up, and then a stormwater utility would be on top of that. So that would be a negative on the stormwater side. There's no perfect remedy on one side or the other. There's no easy solution except to say to the residents, it's our job to maintain the infrastructure so that your children can live in a town that's viable and, you know, doesn't flood, and so that then you can have your grandchildren live in a town that's viable and doesn't flood. I mean, it's all of our responsibilities to maintain the infrastructure for the next generation. And so, yes, it's difficult to have to write that check, but you do it because you want your children and your grandchildren to continue to have a great Batavia. We came up with and are recommending ultimately a resolution to pledge property tax funds. This doesn't close the door on a stormwater utility. We can always go back and revisit the idea of a stormwater utility, but really for the reason of simplicity and it's it's deductible. By pledging property tax funds, at budget time, and basically staff coming up with a program and recommending a program, and then having that program supported by tax funds, you know, is a very viable way of proceeding forward. And I think it should be said, though, and this is not anything new either, the general fund has been under stress for, you know, our expenses go up every year. So the general fund continues to be under stress. There are other things that are funded out of the general fund, police, fire, all of our personnel that are going to continue to have to be funded out of the general fund, and our roadway program. And that's the one thing, too, that we need to ultimately re-look at our roadway funding and put more money towards our roads. The same reason that we're talking about storm sewer. So pledging property taxes, again, isn't easy. Creating a stormwater utility isn't easy. But it's a matter of, you know, long-term viability of the town and maintaining and looking back at the great history we have and making sure that our grandchildren can look back at the history we create, so.
Open it up, who wants to start off here?
So pledging property tax means that we're acknowledging that there are tax exempt organizations and properties in the city that will not pay to have, to lessen the impact of stormwater. That's a value judgment that we're making. And
It's a value judgment that
heavily during the stormwater utility. I thought that was kind of the whole point of this, was to be able to spread this out.
And it impacts industrial versus residential differently also. So those are value judgments that you would be making. It may be easier for a industrial person to compete with a surrounding town if the fees are quote unquote buried in the property taxes than they are explicit, and you know, you got to come in and you got to pay this extra stormwater fee. The arguments again can be made to both sides of the equation.
Well, and I would say that from what I remember reading of history, the past 5 years or so on, when we look at different places that were attempting stormwater utilities, they were almost always hit with, well, you need to take us that are exempt, being school districts and churches, you know, to pull them out, the tax exempt entities that are out there asking for a break on the stormwater utilities.
Not from a legal standpoint, but from a political standpoint.
Right, and that's what I was gonna say, is that's our heat that we end up taking for it. I guess in my mind, I really think that, you know, we have to look again at what's best for the city, and, you know, I'd rather be able to write it off on my taxes than just pay the bill that comes with the utility bill every month and not be able to write anything off. Not that either one of them is easier to have to pay for, but it is what it is.
Well,
Mike?
I mean, the information that we received, we had the phase one by the company out of Connecticut, right? Municipal Financial Services.
Yep.
Okay, they kind of broke it down, but they did tell us that if we wanted a stormwater utility, we can fund it either way, property taxes or through fees. And they said if you don't want to, we can also fund just through not have a stormwater utility and fund it through fees or property taxes also.
Right.
And so, but they did break it down. If you were to break it down through fees, you'd have to use what they call the ERUs. And they said that the ERUs were approximately 3,000 square feet per residential, and it was $4.25 per one ERU. And so if you went with that system, I mean, it'd be roughly, that's $4.50 a household a month.
Correct.
Okay?
Roughly. Yep.
Something like $4.25.
Yep.
And so that would be a whole lot cheaper than a property tax increase perhaps. You know, it's about, what does it come to, $50 a year, you know, per household. So it's not overwhelming that way either. I think the big expense of that would be, if it was a stormwater utility, would be the administration of it. But we discussed also 2 or 3 years ago that the administration would be, we wouldn't be adding on to personnel to do that. We did have that discussion, I believe.
Well, I think you could structure the tax
And so what I'm
be the
saying,
same amount.
what I'm saying is also though that if you did that, I just lost my train of thought, I was interrupted, but if you went with the stormwater utility and the EIUs, the people who would pay the most would be our industrial users. And that's a problem for our city, because we want to keep the industry in our city, you don't want to be chasing them out. So we would have to really sit down and talk about, if we went to phase two, say we were doing a stormwater utility, go to phase two, it would be about $65,000 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little more now. Then if we went to the complete implementation, it was about $100,000. I believe they said it would probably be a little bit more now for the implementation. So roughly it would cost, we've already paid about $38,000, I believe, right?
I can't remember, I don't remember how much we paid MFSG, but yes, there is.
Something
we
like
do know
that.
for
So we're
fact-
talking about $200,000.
We do know for a
to
fact
get
it's
it implemented.
$150,000 to implement a
Right.
stormwater utility,
And
yeah.
so so then we would have to, they would help us if we were to hire them or anybody, WBK, whoever we decide to talk to, if we decide to do that. We would have to then talk about how we're gonna get our churches to pay, get our other taxing bodies to pay if it's a fee, and then we can do both, though, right? We can do property taxes and we can do fees. We can try to mix it and match it. Very difficult for staff, very difficult to administer, but try to lighten the load on the industrial parts of our city. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but I think that's kind of what we're looking at. Is that not a fair assessment?
There's no probably technical reason why you can't do both. Do a stormwater utility at one level and a property tax at another level. The property tax is not a burden on staff at all. I mean, the property tax is just an implementation
stuff.
of a rate. Yeah, and then a receipt of revenues. The stormwater utility is more administratively burdensome, and you got to balance, if you're gonna do a small stormwater utility and a small property tax, does the stormwater utility become worthwhile?
Right.
You know, the overhead, if you will, stays constant, and the revenue may become so small that it may not be worthwhile. Those are options. I guess we were going for the KISS principle and trying to,
Right. So what, like today's thing we're discussing is basically getting money to start addressing our stormwater issues and have the discussion for stormwater utility at a later date. Not keep it off the table.
Right.
Keep it to discuss, but we do need to start putting aside revenues now for property taxes, I'll say, for our stormwater. And I agree with that. I think we ought to start addressing our stormwater issues because, as I said in the past, climate change is upon us. There is a lot more water falling on our town, and people are flooding out. And it's our neighbors flooding, it's some of us are flooding, and it's a quality of life issue for our city, for our residents. So I think it's something we need to address, and address hard and serious. And that's how I see it.
So if I can, it could be an acknowledgement of council of the importance of stormwater to pledge property taxes to begin addressing stormwater, while at the same time not closing the door on a utility. Because 2 years from now or 4 years from now, the state of Illinois might say, you know, no longer can you raise property taxes, or we might say we need money for our roadway program. So we haven't kicked the can down the road. We've acknowledged stormwater. We've begun to fund stormwater. But 4 years down the road, we might say, oh, now we need to fund stormwater in a different way. And you can always still do that.
Right.
You can always still go to a utility at that point. The biggest thing is getting over the hurdle, and we already have. Council has already started to acknowledge the need of funding for stormwater.
Can you fund stormwater utility with property taxes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so it's not an either or.
It's not an either or.
All right. I would like to say I'm highly in favor of a stormwater utility because I think it helps ensure continuity of work over time. Given the nature of this council, of government in general, there's a lot of turnover. And councils may decide that stormwater isn't a priority in the future. And I would like to ensure that it continues a priority for generations to come, like you said. And to me, the only way that we can do that for sure is to form a utility that will allow us to plan and continue the work that we commit to do.
That's really an administrative function, organizational function, because the revenue will still come in
Whether
Yeah,
you
the rev-
call it a utility or whether Gary
Right.
calls it a division of Public Works,
The revenue's
it's still
still
gonna do
gonna
the
have
same
to
thing.
take
They're
care.
gonna take in money,
But
and they're
The
gonna,
commitment is from council, yeah,
To fund it.
yeah.
But the stormwater utility, if it's formed, it's easier to control, it's easier to plan as an entity.
But I'm not, I mean, and this I may have to lean on Peggy, you almost speak of it in the context of like an enterprise fund, where it would have its own dedicated funding source. Like our water and our wastewater and our electric, obviously are not funded by the general fund. They have their own separate and dedicated revenue sources. Funding a stormwater utility with property taxes is basically using general funds to fund a stormwater utility. So it's not really like an enterprise fund, but you're talking about creating a commitment within the general fund to still focus on stormwater.
Correct,
I need to stop here because Mark's been waiting to talk and I wanna let him talk. He's been very patient waiting.
Thanks, Alan.
But-
Yeah, I had the pleasure this weekend of getting caught up on 5 years of discussions you guys have had and reading this all for the first time. As I read through it, to me, I understand the impact to industry if we go with, having it as a fee rather than a tax, and I understand that. But there was also the ability for the industry to start doing things to improve their flow so that you accomplish two things. They lower their fees, and we lower the impact to the environment by what industry does. So I'm not in favor of tax for multiple reasons, because as a tax, it's going to get hidden. And you see that when you get your tax bill. And, oh, geez, I didn't realize I was paying all that. And so it's kind of hidden in there. I'm very much about transparency. So having it show up on the bill and somebody can say, oh my gosh, what the heck is this? And everybody sees it at the exact same time. Everybody gets their water, electric bill, et cetera. Yes, I guarantee you that first month, the number of calls that go up because people aren't paying attention. But I'll be honest, I mean, until Saturday when I read all of this, I wasn't paying attention. I had no idea. And it is extraordinarily important, and I realize that now. And it's all these things that, going from being, a citizen to an alderman overnight and realizing everything started to click. Wow, yeah, government is expensive. And, you sit there and you want to hate against the government for the fact that, oh my gosh, a tax. And I think it comes across less aggressive, I guess, or something along those lines as a fee rather than tax. I think tax has just become such a negative connotation. And I see that, with the tax, 70% of it, somewhere in that range, I can't remember what the numbers were, is going to be by the residents, but the residents only make up 40% of the impact, something to that effect. I don't remember the exact numbers, but in those ranges. So it seems like, well, why should the residents be paying more when they're impacting less? And again, with the credits that can come out of industry making changes to the way they do to their impact, I think that becomes much more equitable, and it increases, it's better in the long run as well. So, that's my thoughts.
Makes sense.
Mike?
Can you explain what can be done by an industrial, whether it be yet undeveloped or an existing development, an industrial project, development, concept, if we were to go with a runoff-based utility?
So if we were to go with a runoff-based utility, there are certain credits that might be able to be achieved by an industrial developer. If it's a modern industrial development developed within the last 10, 15 years, they've developed under the King County Code, so they probably have all the necessary stormwater to be compliant with our code. So that particular development would have to go over and above. So maybe that development would have to do some rain gardens where they currently have Kentucky bluegrass. Or that development might have to expand their detention basin and reduce the size of their restrictors to provide more storage than they would even be required to under the ordinances. So that development, the modern industrial developments are going to have to invest, in their own infrastructure in order to do that. older developments, which were grandfathered in under the ordinance, so they didn't meet current codes. Probably, I mean, a lot of these may not even physically have the room to do the things I'm describing, because part of industrial development is you need to maximize, maximize your lot coverage. So you don't necessarily have vast stretches of Kentucky bluegrass to convert to stormwater. Older developments, that's probably much more even the case, where they just don't have the physical room, but they same things. They could do BMPs, which are best management practices, stormwater, or rain gardens. They could expand their ponds. It's
Pervious pavers.
pervious pavers, turn their parking lots from asphalt to pervious pavers. All fairly big ticket items. Now, if I'm a brand new developer, if I'm a brand new industrial person and I'm working on a greenfield lot, again, I can do the same things. I can say that the ordinance requires me to put in 10 acre-feet of storage. Well, I'm going to put in 15 acre-feet of storage. I could prove that I've reduced my runoff by 30%, and therefore I can get a credit. So there are those things, but they're all capital intensive on the industrial side, because in order to have any sort of substantial impact, it takes a fairly large improvement. Whereas a neighborhood residential house, if you were to convert your front parkway into a rain garden, that might be 25% of your total lot, which has now become, I mean, you can do a fairly small footprint and affect relatively a large percentage of your lot. It doesn't translate that way on the industrial side.
Yeah, I think just from my point on that is that there's also, from an industrial and a commercial standpoint of doing those things, that creates a lot of goodwill for, the community towards those customers. I mean, just when companies are putting solar panels on their roofs, it's still questionable about whether there's the ROI, but why are they doing that? They're doing that because, hey, look I'm trying to help the environment. And so sometimes that cost, there's a cost benefit for a company to do that. Companies, like I said, stores put solar panels on there. They're not necessarily cutting their costs with that, but then people see the solar panels like, oh, that's a place I want to shop. So there's a benefit there to them as well.
So I'm going to flip around the argument and play devil's advocate. The mayor will often point out, in fact, at every opportunity, points out the fact that Batavia's property tax burden is extremely low, very low. We can go to our industrial customers and say, your property tax burden is very low. We can compete against other communities by saying our property tax burden is very low. So if we raise our property tax burden a little bit, we still can compete very well with other communities. But if we put on an explicit fee that they don't have to pay in any other community, just from a marketing standpoint, now you have this extra fee if you come to Batavia. And I'm not in the real estate world, but it's one of those things, it's a marketing ploy, if nothing else, that you see this extra fee, and if you did the math, it still would come out the same, but now that you have an external and explicit fee, it just seems worse than if you just increase your property tax a little bit and you're still competing with everyone else.
And that's not to say that even on a level playing field, without the stormwater fee, our utility fees are not necessarily competitive with the surrounding marketplace. So you're exacerbating that problem under that scenario.
And I'll speak to the electric utility side. The industrial sector of our community supplements the residential side. So, I mean, you just said the opposite on the stormwater. I mean, at one time, this is years ago now, one time it was something like 19%, where we would have to raise residential rates by 19% to make them pay their true fair share compared to the industrial folks. There's a subsidy there because the industrial folks basically subsidize the residential side. So again, devil's advocate, maybe stormwater flips around. Maybe the residents supplement a little more on the stormwater side than the industrial folks do. So.
I have a question. We don't need to have a stormwater utility, though, to have the industrial park comply to those ordinances.
No, the ordinances are the ordinances, and they still have to comply to those regardless.
Whether we have a stormwater utility or not, we still can say, this is the way you have to do things.
Right.
Marty? I think it always comes down to the pros and the cons. And but what we're kind of still missing is there's always been a commitment by council to do the funding for these projects. There's never been a, no, we don't need, and I don't mean always.
The last couple of years there, yeah.
Currently, yes. Well, but going currently, you know, and I'm leaning more towards the tax side of it for a different view on transparency. Because when you're talking about the tax burden being shifted around, well, if you make churches and schools and municipal buildings and parks all pay their fair share, well, they're just going to raise their taxes, and it's, you know, it's still a pass-through, because the churches still have to pay, their congregation has to pay. There's not a special pocket of money that residents will still pay one way or another. And if the downside of that is potentially making our industrial go or not be more competitive than they already aren't in the electrical side of it, they leave, then we've cut our throat, because then there's a lot of bad things that happen if they start leaving. They won't leave because of a tax burden one way or another, but you keep increasing the fees and the fees and the fees. That's all we hear from them that makes them go, I can't stay here anymore. And if they can't stay here anymore, then residents will be making up a larger burden than can even be imagined, as we know when Suncast was considering leaving. We know what the economic impact to residents was, and that was nearly unfathomable. So I still, and I do think it gives us more options in the long run, because we're not saying no to anything. We've still made the commitment to funding, and for me, it just comes down to, this is the best way that I feel for the funding, for all the reasons in the totality of everything that we've listened for the past couple of years. I think that in the current situation, with the best information that we have at hand, this is the way that I would go with it, while not shutting the door to anything future down the line. Things will change, and I want to have more options and more maneuverability for us to have things change, rather than create a stormwater utility that staff is saying would tax them, would add extra work to them that we don't need to have them doing at this point. So that being the kind of the tiebreaker, let them do their jobs for right now, not peg us into a situation and fund what we need to fund. We know that we need to fund these things.
Well, and if we identified, you know, say it's $425 or whatever the number is per month, if it was fee-based, do you have any idea, Peggy, like on a $50 a year per house, the average, like what kind of tax increase they would see? I mean, it would be 50, if you're trying to raise $50, is that a penny? What would it be on the tax rate, do you know?
Well, it would be based on the EAV of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And on 500,000, I think we determined it would be 5 cents, about 5 cents on the.
To raise $500,000 a year?
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be 5 cents.
I think the last part about the tax side of it is, it goes right back to Peggy. She puts out such a perfect budget that every year we can go, you know, people wonder, well, where are my taxes going? We can show, here is, right here, this project for this year is going to separating the stormwater in this area. There's flooding over in this area. That goes to the narrative that we be able to show where your money is actually being spent.
Right, and I
that's a
think if we
great
come
time
out
to
and we say
budget
we're gonna commit $500,000 a year, we're gonna commit $250,000 or whatever the number we pick is, and then we tell people that's what your tax rate's gonna go up to fund this, and then we make sure that that money gets spent on stormwater, you know, whether it be, we call it a utility, or whether it's a division of street, you know, whatever it ends up being. I think that if we make that commitment and that's how we fund that, I think then the community will understand that that's how we're doing it.
We have to commit that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every year, and then some.
Right, and
I
then.
mean, we cannot let it slip and say, well, you know, we're catching up, and since it's a property tax in the general fund, we say, well, you know, we have streets coming up, let's just take care of streets this year. We have to commit to this, and that's, and I understand what you're saying about that, and I don't know how I see, but I just, reading through the stuff, it kind of sounded to me, I knew Baxter Woodman and the people from Connecticut were telling us we should go with the the stormwater utility. WBK is kind of leaning towards a stormwater utility. I see a lot of the memos that we got over the course of 5 years, staff was leaning towards a stormwater utility. And so I'm just going by what we're being told by the professionals, because I don't know, okay, that people are leaning more towards a stormwater utility. We don't have to go to that. As all I'm saying is, from here on in, if we make the commitment, we have to commit and not backslide. And that's our concern if we just do property taxes and have public utilities or public works do it, like, you know, who would administer it? You know, someone would have to administer it, it'd be probably Scott Haynes.
Well, funding for stormwater projects, we basically expand upon what we've been doing now the last 18, 24 months, and that is, we'll get into a cycle of engineering design.
Right.
Followed by construction, and then, just like we've done on the sanitary collection side, we're gonna have evaluations done on the storm sewers, and followed by, you know, lining projects. And so some of that is under Scott Haynes' purview, some of that is under Rahat's and engineering's purview. And so, yes, it falls to staff, but
The design and administration would be under Rahat, and the actual implementation of the work would be under Scott Haynes. But in a stormwater utility, what we would also have, I believe, is what they were telling us, is we'd have the riverbank stabilization. That we don't lose sight of that. We don't lose sight of our Mahoney Creek and Batavia Creek and the maintenance of those, and all the conveyances we have of stormwater right now, the upsizing of it. I know you guys are working at it, and we need more money for it, so.
that's what I said, right, as I started this conversation. Rahat and I, in the course of about 30 seconds, could come up with $10 million worth of projects real easy. And it's not hard to do.
Gary, I would like to add to Mike. I've been here since the beginning, and we didn't always have money. I had $50,000. So we were starting to look at options as bringing it in front of the council, showing them we need more money, we're getting complaints, there's issues, and obviously the bigger rain events, 2013, 2015, kind of helped maybe shed the light on some of the issues that we were dealing with. We had small neighborhood issues. It only solved, you know, providing some pump connections, extending the storm sewer to one street. And so that was our option, just looking and seeing how we could potentially bring that to you guys and getting that funding. I talk with the other municipal engineers up the river, and the ones that we always compare, our taxes are so low. Well, Karen Young's now in St. Charles. She's facing the same problems there, and every time we talk, you know, it's an item of discussion, and how are you funding these? We have X million dollars worth of projects we need to fund. I don't know, we might need to look at a stormwater utility. Geneva, they're with Dave Hyder right now looking at a stormwater utility. So they're looking at options just as well. I just wanted to make that known to you guys as well, because I do think that you kind of harp on that nobody else is doing, that we might be first. I'm not here nor there, we just need funding, but I do want to let you know what I am aware of, that other communities are looking at these options, because they do too have multiple stormwater issues that are being underfunded at this time.
Helen, I have a question.
So I was reading through the report, and it says, so an EAV of 120,000 would be approximately $137 in taxes. So it is based on this, and I don't know if we're using the same figures, but based on this report, that's what we'd be, it'd be 2.5 times what we'd be paying roughly. It depends on the house, obviously.
As a fee?
What's that?
As a fee per month, if it was?
No, the tax would be $137 on an EAV of 120,000.
Okay.
So obviously that doesn't cover everybody, but
Mhm.
it is a higher, that appears to be then higher for a lot of folks than $450 a month.
What section, are you reading that from the initial report that they did for the?
Yes.
And that was probably doing a levy of full funding, and that has not been the recommendation, either in forming a stormwater utility or levying a tax. we were going to ease into it and not have it be the full fee. The fee would be higher, certainly if you collected that amount from property tax.
Part of the study was to give our current status as to what we do and what type of activities we do, and then give what we would need to do, putting, right now, it's deemed as storm sewer, has an infinite life, doing ongoing maintenance, and kind of making the ultimate Christmas wish list in the stormwater utility, so kind of going to the full extent of what we could potentially be doing. So some, like Peggy said, there was different levels of service that we'd be providing, some equal to what we were doing, then some that were additional on top of that.
Dave?
No.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing everybody say, kind of reading between the lines a little bit, and my own thoughts too, is there's two things going on here. One is perception and one is concern. Perception is the, if you form a stormwater utility, there's a guarantee you're going to work on projects, stormwater projects. I mean, it's just like you got a water utility, you got a sanitary utility, you got electric utility, you're going to fund that every year because you got to do these things. You got to keep the lights on, you got to keep the water running. So you're not going to stop doing that process because you can't. So if you form a stormwater utility, you're going to have the same thing going on there. So that's the perception. But yet you could stop, because you don't have to spend $1 million a year. You could not spend anything on stormwater utility and deal with the problems. The concern is that if we don't form a stormwater utility, as I think Mike said, we could have a rough year where something comes up and we say, well, you know, I know we passed a resolution and we committed to pledging these taxes towards this type of work, but we really need to divert that money this year into that.
Sidewalks.
And then, yeah, sidewalks, whatever the case is. Or maybe you got a major issue with the sanitary plant. You got to spend money there that you don't have, so you just divert it, whatever it is. You got a bad winter, you got to spend all the money on snow removal, so you divert the money. So there's the concern that you're not going to follow through with your commitment if you just go with the taxing rather than the stormwater utility. Regardless, either way, it can be changed. Whether you form a utility or you write the resolution of commitment, you can change it. So I think, you know, as the wind blows with politics and everything, I mean, I'm looking around the room here, and when we first started this conversation on stormwater utility, half the people weren't here. And we had some pretty good conversation, but we needed to have the conversation again tonight because, we really just touched the tip of the iceberg on the pros and the cons of the industrial users and the churches. And, I mean, you want to talk about, you know, writing the fee to the churches, you're going to have everybody that was down here during the Campana issue, they're going to be down here again, and not in favor of something, and opposing it instead. And so I just, you know, I think we got to get moving on this. Gary needs the money. We've committed to that. I think we can all agree that it's not fair that some people in this town have sewage backing up in their houses when we get rain and other people don't. That's not right. So we got to fix that problem. We got a combined sewer system that we've known for many years needs to be fixed, and as Gary said, it's more expensive today than it was yesterday. So we got to get going on that. So I think we just need to make the commitment. We need to pass the resolution, and it doesn't close the door, as some people have said about, you know, if we want to change things in the future, we can, but there's a lot to think about and batter back and forth if you go with the utility, how you're going to come up with those fees, and should you come up with those fees for economic interest and development, and it's a big can of worms, so.
Is there a way, if we were to do taxes, and I don't know if Peggy can answer this, if we were to say, okay, the next 5 cents we add on to our taxes only gets used for the stormwater?
Yes.
We could do that without having to do an SSA or something like that. We could say that 5 cents out of it or 10 cents out of the taxes that are collected by the city are only for this purpose.
Yes, and in fact, you did authorize us to increase the levy $300,000 this last year, which we did, and that is being used. It's being transferred directly into the drainage fund, which technically you could call it the stormwater utility fund. It's only for drainage projects.
See, and that's why I think, then again, that goes to Mike's point and Dave's and other points where, if we're gonna say, yeah, we're gonna fund that, but yeah, we had a bad year and we had to spend too much money on salt or snow removal, if that money is allocated to go into that fund to pay for stormwater, it only gets spent on stormwater. It doesn't get pulled out and spent on streets or spent on whatever. It has to be used for that. And I think that would keep us more in line where I think all of us are in agreement, we have to do something about it. We can't let sewage and stormwater keep backing up, flooding occur. I mean, we have to address those things. And if we were to separate that money out and say, this is what it's gonna get spent for, then we have to do that.
How much are you looking for us to commit to?
Well, I think that I had made that statement earlier. I think staff at budget time needs to come back to you with a comprehensive plan. And I'll go back to what I said early on, that you're also talking about the general fund as a whole, you're talking about a roadway program, you're talking about stormwater. So we need to come back to you with, a comprehensive plan for funding. So I'm not gonna, I could tell you, $4 million a year, because I can spend it. But the reality is, we have to think about it in the big picture. And so we'll come back to you with an overall picture, and that's what then you guys will consider in budget time.
And 5 cents is not gonna cut it. We've got tens of millions
Right.
of dollars in projects. 5 cents, like, we're talking like a quarter.
But again, I think, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Dan, but I think I think staff was hopeful tonight that we could get some general consensus that, at least for now, we want to go in this direction. That's the first step. And the second step will be, we may have a debate one night about it being 5 cents, 10 cents a quarter, or 30 cents, or 1 cent, and that's probably a debate for that night to happen. But you're right that discussion needs to happen at some point in time.
Ellen?
Susan?
As Dan said, and as I've been listening to this, it seems like that amount of money is literally a drop in the proverbial bucket. So how do we play catch up? I mean, we've been maintaining or trying to maintain, but falling slightly short. How do we get ahead and become more proactive about it? At a rate of $500,000 a year, will we ever get ahead?
The American Society of Civil Engineers puts out a report card. They rate each state every year, but not every state gets rated each year. And I think the last time the state of Illinois got rated, we were a solid D.
Oh,
so I mean,
excellent.
we as the civil engineers recognize that the United States infrastructure has not been maintained. This country, from the 1800s through the 18th, 19th century, 20th century, we did a great job of building the highway system. We put in modern water systems, great sewer systems, and all those systems now are reaching 100 years old, and now we have to rebuild them all, and no one has thought about that. And so the reality is that there's no shortage of projects, no shortage of money needed, but we can't all afford to do it overnight. So our grandchildren will still be having to fix some issues that we're dealing with today. And so we can only do what's reasonable in the context of everything. That means stormwater, that means streets, that means, keeping proper funding for your police and your fire. That means, your forestry. That's the big picture. And that's where ultimately, as decision makers, you guys have to decide what's overall palatable to the community for funding, and then how do we allocate that.
Thank you. That's a tough position to be in.
It is. And again, you're paying me, I've told each and every one of you this, you're paying me to make 40 and 50-year decisions. And that's why you pay me, is to manage your infrastructure on a 40 or 50-year cycle.
If we were to say that 5 cents raises $500,000 a year, and it's, what are we at, 67 cents now, or 69 cents?
69.
69 cents this year, so it's not even a 10% raise to the tax rate.
I don't know if that's the amount that we would recommend.
Right.
We specifically did not include the
Right.
amount in the resolution. We just wanted to make sure that
Right,
we had a
and
direction to go.
I guess what I was gonna say is I think that's where we have to start to try to justify this, is it a 10% increase? Is it a 5, 10, 15, 20% increase? Whatever we settle at, that kind of is gonna fall in with how we make this decision of how we do this. And if it's some combination of a fee and a tax, whatever will work and get us going in the right direction for this. I don't think, Dan, I don't think we're gonna be able to jump in there and get ahead of this ever. I think
probably
we're
never
always
gonna
gonna
get
be,
ahead of it.
always gonna be
That's
playing catch up
reality.
on this stuff. And I think we just have to do the best that we can, and weigh it against everything else we have to spend money on.
Is it worse because we're in a river town?
No, Batavia's not abnormally compared to other towns.
So, and I think based on all of the reports, because I think I've been here through most of them, we did look at other surrounding communities and say, these do have stormwater utilities and this is how they're doing it and this is how much they're paying. And so we do have kind of a baseline to be able to look at and say, well, this is how other towns are funding it.
And some were really aggressive. There were some that
Yes.
had big fees and some that had virtually
Downers,
nothing,
yeah.
So,
So since we do have 6 other items on the agenda tonight,
Oh,
and
Dave.
this one isn't gonna go away for a while, you do want this resolution, though?
I think it shows council's commitment towards.
yeah.
Make the motion.
Even if we're not agreed on the actual amounts on it, I think to
Those will come
show,
at budget time.
to show the commitment, that's where we're gonna have to make the really hard decision. I think
That'll
this is
come
one that, yes, we're gonna make the commitment. How big of a commitment are we
I
gonna
move
make?
we
as
recommend the
budget?
city council approval of resolution 17-67-R.
Second.
Motion by Brown, second by Chanzit. Should we do roll call on this?
All in favor?
Rosato? Oh, I'm sorry, it was Brown that made the motion, so I'll start with
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
Brown? O'Brien?
Aye.
Callahan?
Aye.
Meitzler?
Aye.
Mueller?
Aye.
Ewer?
Nay.
Saron?
Aye.
McFadden?
Aye.
Rosato?
Aye.
Atak?
Aye.
Stark?
Aye.
Chanzit?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
And Savati?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Okay, item number 9, resolution 17-61-R, authorizing execution of a contract for the 2017 crack filling program with SKC Construction Incorporated for $124,173. Alderman Wolf.
1 second. Okay. I'm downloading still. So, there we go. This is the crack filling program for, which consists of cleaning and sealing any cracks, voids, or joints in asphalt to basically prolong the life of the streets that we can't afford to replace. Anybody else have any other questions on this? It's pretty simple. We do this every year, and basically it's a way to try to preserve what we do have that is still serviceable. No questions? I'll entertain a motion for 17-61-R.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Ewer, second by Stark. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Consent agenda. Okay. Item 10, resolution 17-62-R, authorizing intergovernmental agency agreement with Kane County Division of Transportation for Phase 2 engineering for Main Street at Deer Path Road intersection replacement. What's this replacing 17-20-R, Andrea, or Rod?
So council approved that resolution, sorry, if somebody wants to talk. Council approved the resolution, Kane County, since passing that resolution, took it to their board, and they decided to make some changes. The changes are mostly adding insurance requirement. Financial commitment-wise, nothing changed. It's still 50-50 between the city and county. So financially, there is no change. It's just more insurance requirement they are requiring from the consultant. So we are bringing it back so that you are aware of it, and just approve the new one and rescind the old one.
Okay. Does everybody understand what this one is about? Anyone care to make a motion on 17-62-R?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thielen Atak, second by Mueller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Consent agenda.
Sure.
Okay, item 11, resolution 17-66-R, authorizing a budget amendment for the funding of Deer Path Road Bridge Capital Engineering. Memo from Andrea. Alderman Wolf.
1 second. This would be the federal funding for design and construction of Deer Path Road Bridge on Main Street, and they would need a budget amendment to complete the payment for the design engineering. Find the amount in here. Our obligation will be $17,000. Right, that's the only change in it?
That's 20%, right?
Yes.
Yeah, $17,000. So that's what the budget amendment would be for.
The design was completed, but the right-of-way acquisition and all took longer than we expected. But we didn't carry over the money because we were expecting to pay it off, so we didn't rebudget, and we didn't rebudget in subsequent years. So we are bringing it back to rebudget that 2014 money, or not rebudget, but our budget 17,000, do a budget amendment to pay that 17,000.
And I do remember that the land acquisition seemed to take a lot longer on
Yeah.
like one or two of those that took
Phase two,
forever
yeah.
to get done.
So we had this money just kind of sitting there, waiting to spend it, basically.
That's what Peggy can probably answer that.
Because it came from the federal government, right?
No,
No, this is our share of it.
No, the 17 is our share, 85 is IDOT's share.
85 is the total amount. Out of
85.
that, 17,000 is our share. So we'll pay the consultant and send an invoice to.
But there was money sitting there from 2014, because wasn't there a federal grant?
No, there was not a federal grant for
Okay.
our 20% share. The
It's
federal,
just our 20% share, that's all? it was?
that's correct.
And so from 2014, we just kept carrying it over?
Right, it probably should have been rebudgeted, but we didn't know when the invoice was going to come in from them,
Okay.
because it had to go back to IDOT to be
For
approved
approval.
again.
Okay, and Civil Tech was okay with that, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
they,
okay.
they knew. We have been asking them to, make the changes and all that, but it had to go back to IDOT, and IDOT took like 6 months to approve it. So we finally have received it, and now we are closing it out. In fact, I'll be bringing another one back for Main Street design for the obvious same reason, like in next couple of weeks, to do the same type of approval.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone care to make a motion on Resolution 1766R?
So moved.
Motion by Savati, second by McFadden. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Consent agenda.
Consent agenda.
Okay, item 12, ordinance 17-38, dwelling unit separations for the multifamily, memo from Jeff Albertson. Alderman Wolf.
That is mine, not community development. Okay, I'll just finish up here. You know what, Jeff, I'll just let you go ahead and present this there.
Okay, thank you. Staff has been reviewing all of our building code adoptions, and we're actually quite a bit behind on bringing these forward. And we are still several months away from bringing the entire package forward to be reviewed by council. There is one item, however, that we wanted to bring forward separately because it does affect a number of our multifamily projects that are in various stages of approval or discussion. And that is the separations between dwelling units in multifamily developments. We have been discussing this as part of our overall code amendments, and we are going to be recommending as part of that, reducing our current 2-hour requirement, which has been in our code for a very long time, to the base code requirement, which is 1 hour. But we did, as I indicated, we did want to bring this forward sooner, just this one item, because we have a number of multifamily development projects that have been inquiring about this as they come in, and also because of some of them are actually in the design phase now. We have discussed this thoroughly with fire as part of our overall code adoptions and amendments that we're going to be proposing. They are in support of this. These buildings are all fully sprinklered. They have full monitored fire alarm systems. So there's plenty of, and the hour does give occupants plenty of opportunity to egress from the building in case of an emergency. So, it could be viewed as a slight reduction from our current requirements in fire safety, but it's bringing us more in line. One of the things we've tried to do is we do these amendments and do these code updates every time as we try and reduce our amendments to come more in line with the base code and the code that is being adopted, across the country, different states, different cities, and this will do that. So we think it is a good thing to do. We are recommending approval of this requirement.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Mark, you get to go first tonight.
Thanks.
Now.
You said they're all fully sprinkled. Does this include duplexes and things like that?
No, this multifamily is defined as 3 units and more.
3, okay.
So this does
So
not,
everything
this does not
around would be covered. We don't have any houses that have been converted into 3 family units or anything like that wouldn't, okay.
No.
Marty?
Would this or any culmination of fire decreasing standards have any effect on our ISO rating? Okay, thank you.
If they weren't sprinkled, well, do they have to be sprinkled?
Yes.
So they have to be.
The
So
code,
that's
the
why
code
we're going to
mandates
the 1
that
hour.
these, the code mandates now that these are required to be.
Even existing buildings.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Lucy?
So for the whole, like with 1 North Washington, for the entire building, this would be used? Or 1
Use the
hour?
mic, Lucy.
For the entire building, this would be used. Are there any limit to the number of units that
No.
can be together? So,
There isn't any limit to the number of units. The one thing that the ordinance does keep in place is and this is in our current ordinance, is there's a separation requirement between the parking garage and the residential above that is still required to be concrete.
block or concrete?
Yeah, concrete. That remains in place with this ordinance. They would be allowed to reduce the division between units from 2 hour to 1 under this proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if no other questions, entertaining a motion on ordinance 17-38.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ewer, second by Mueller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
You want that on consent?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Item 13, project status.
Okay, we do have one big project status to share with you this evening, and that is that we interviewed the internal candidate for the deputy chief last week, and the decision is to appoint the detective sergeant, Sean Mazza, to the position of deputy chief of administration. I think this forms an excellent command staff for our police department, a group of individuals who are very evenly balanced with the different strengths that they bring to their individual positions, but have worked together for many years. And everybody is very supportive of the decision. Sean Mazza is very deserving of the promotion. He has done the work to make himself ready for this position. He's performed exceptionally well as the detective sergeant, and we expect that he will perform equally well in his new position as the deputy chief. This will be announced to all employees tomorrow and to the police department this evening. Next is that we're interviewing 2 firms this week in conjunction with the city of Geneva to hire a company to do a wage study. So we have decided that by combining the wage study for the 2 cities, because municipalities have so many common positions between our 2 cities, that we can realize sort of an advantage from a cost perspective of hiring the same firm. So those interviews will be going on this week. The selection will be thereafter. It's expected the study will last about 4 months. The sculptures, the remaining 2 sculptures for the Donovan Bridge, we expect to be installed by the end of June. An update on the One Washington Place project. Of course, we have multiple conversations with the developer on a weekly basis. And a discussion that we had late last week, it looks like the developer will be ready to submit their construction plans the 3rd week in July. It'll take us about 4 weeks to review those drawings, and we expect that if everything goes well with that review and there isn't too much back and forth, that the developer would be ready to begin construction in mid-September. Also wanted to talk a little bit about updates that you'll be able to see soon to our homepage of the city website. Chris Cudworth, our communication coordinator, has added a tab to the lower right area where you can find calendars and news and information. The new tab is called Community Events, and Chris has been collaborating with the other bodies of government in the city of Batavia, and we want to include things that are happening at our library, at our public schools, including Main Street and the Chamber as well. So he'll be collaborating with those organizations so that visitors to our website get a feel of all the different types of events that are happening in their community and can look to the city of Batavia as a source to see all of those things in one place. Then once there is those list of events, when you click on those, it will take you to the organization website that is sponsoring that event. So as to not make it seem that the city is the sponsor of the event and invite calls to our staff to answer questions about the events. I think once the user clicks through to the website of the organization that's sponsoring the event, they'll be able to see that as the source of information. Chris, is there anything to add in that regard?
Yeah, the first 3 tabs as well have been sort of reorganized to clarify because there was news and announcements sort of wedged together. We've separated some of that out, so it's very clear to every user how to navigate. That's the primary.
And that's all I have unless somebody has any questions about project status for me.
Anybody got any questions?
I have a quick comment. Just on the website, it may seem like a simple change, but it looks great. It does, and it really helps the navigational experience.
Good, thanks.
Oh, I did forget to bring one thing up. The committee assignments. When the city of Batavia changed from having the individual committees to doing the joint committee of the whole, the committee assignments haven't been updated on an annual basis. And so I just wanted to verify that for government services, that the chair is Alderman Atack and that the vice chair is Alderman McFadden, correct? And then for city services, the chair is Alderman Wolf and the vice chair is Alderman Callahan. For community development, that the chair is Alderman Brown and the vice chair is Alderman Stark. And for public utilities, the chair is Alderman O'Brien and the vice chair is Alderman Chanzit, correct? Okay, I will get those things posted on the website as well.
Okay,
And
that
that's
it?
all I have.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Any others?
I got one thing.
Mayor?
Back in 1983, the city of Batavia celebrated its sesquicentennial, its 150th birthday. And we had a professional artist who lived in town at the time. I think he may have passed away, but he was here, and he drew up a very nice logo we use for the sesquicentennial. It's the one that has the Fermilab high-rise in the foreground, and then a windmill kind of comes out of the back of it. The police department used it for a number of years as their patch. They may still be in some instances. Anyway, that is kind of you know, it was 1983, so that's, 34 years ago we did this. So it's kind of fallen out of presence in the city hall. I got an email the other day from a Batavia High School graduate from the late 1980s by the name of Jay Kramer, who lived up on North and Nortrick Avenue. And he's now in the shirt business. And he is wanting to know if it would be okay if he took the old city logo and made shirts out of it and sold them to people. And I guess my response, I don't necessarily have any problem with it. I think he has to know that if he's doing it, he doesn't have an exclusive on it. And if somebody else wants to do it, they can do it too. But I just thought I'd better run it by all of you guys and see if anybody had got themselves excited about it. There's probably a lot of people would buy one of these shirts and wear them.
Yeah.
It was a very,
Trademark it and take a portion of the proceeds and give them to the food pantry.
The stormwater.
Did we own the design?
Yeah.
I don't think that was ever bought.
The electric
Yeah.
utility.
Let them do it.
Other than the city council adopted it as a logo, I don't think.
I don't have a problem as long as they're available local so we can get them.
Well, I don't know where else he'd sell them,
Yeah.
but Batavia, I mean, I don't, probably go to Geneva, I don't know anybody who'd buy one.
Yeah.
Kind of a narrow vertical.
So nobody said a problem, tell them, go ahead, just know you don't own the rights to it totally. Somebody else may print it up too someday, but just one more piece of Batavia memorabilia on the street.
Good idea, and as long as you're on that, that reminded me that I needed to tell everybody tonight that and I've talked to the mayor about this, the first meeting in June, as you know, I've been kind of working with this committee on the ice skating on the pond thing that we're hoping to do in January. And my wife's involved in that, and she being an ex-teacher, and the mayor and his familiarity with the third grade report for Batavia history that's been done for years, that kind of disappeared a few years back. Well, the third graders they're trying to really bring this back. And I think it might be coincidence that my wife went over and met with some of the third grade teachers to talk about some of this stuff. And anyway, to make a long story short, even though school's going to be out, they would like to come down. The third graders of, I believe it's Alice Gustafson, are going to come down to the first meeting of June, and they've done a report on Batavia's, from what I understand, Batavia's past and Batavia's future. And they've done some art projects on this and posters and stuff, and they'd like to present them to the city council and talk about what their curriculum is going to be going forward for the Batavia report as they see it in the future. So it's kind of coming back to life, and they want to come down and show the city council what they've done, and they want to get down here early so we can all see what they've done. And then I think the mayor is going to give them some special recognition possibly. Maybe the mayor didn't know that, but I think he's going to.
Well, you are now.
But, so that'll be the first weekend, or the first week in June, first meeting in June.
Great.
So, any others?
Just a really quick one. I couldn't help but notice the other day when I drove down Wilson that Bulldogs has their gambling now. Is there a limit on the number of signs that these folks can put in their windows?
I'll have Scott address that.
Yes, under the sign ordinance, you're limited to 25% of the window area. You do not need a permit for it. We have not gotten any complaints about it. We have not gone and measured it. I just was aware of it the other day myself. So we can check into it and see, but it's 25% of the window area is the limitation.
Seems like more.
That it? Any others? No? Okay, then we are going to have an executive session for the purpose of purchase of real estate in imminent litigation and a personnel matter. Need a motion?
So moved?
Second.
Just so we're clear for the record, it's not necessarily personnel. The exception is going to be number 3, which is discussing appointments. So personnel talks about actual employees of the city. So as long as everybody's clear on that, what you're voting on, just to make it clear for the record, in case anybody wants to question the closed meeting later on. So.
Okay. And we had a motion and a second by who?
I seconded.
Motion by
Oh,
Salvati, second.
I made the motion and you seconded.
Motion by.
Something like that.
Second. Motion by Stark, second by Salvati. All in favor?
Aye.